Chapter 436. Other than Yu Huan, Miao Fa, and Xian Zhen, the other celestial venerables had never personally fought with Qin Shi, so their understanding of Qin Shi came from the battle recordings on the Xian Tian mirror. The 7 celestial venerables were very knowledgeable, so it was not difficult to discover through the battle recordings, although Qin Shi seemed ferocious at that time, using his own strength to forcefully deal with the siege of 3 Empyreans. During the fight, he had been in a passive state the entire time, basically without any extra strength to fight back. The 3 celestial venerables almost took away half of Qin Shi's life, not to mention the 10 celestial venerables present. Therefore, after seeing Yu Huan Tianzuan so excited, the 7 celestial venerables could not help but feel a little puzzled. Looking at Yu Huan's aggressive manner, could it be that he had some personal grudge with that person? The 7 celestial venerables each had their own thoughts. As they pondered over the key points, they followed Miao Fa and Xian Zhen to the direction of the dragon drum. The 10 celestial venerables going out to meet the enemy was a grand occasion in divine capital. They did not say that they were not allowed to watch the battle, therefore, the spectators could no longer suppress the excitement in their hearts. As long as they could fly, they followed the footsteps of the 10 celestial venerables and rushed toward Qin Shi's location like a swarm of bees. For a moment, as long as the celestial venerables passed by the floating island, it was like a hornet's nest that was lit by a fire. In an instant, countless celestial venerables and above flew out. It had been a long time since the great world was so lively. Densely packed silhouettes continuously flew across the sky above the floating island like a swarm of locusts. The scene was even more shocking than the final battle in the movie Avatar. It had to be said that this troublemaker not only had a high cultivation, but also had courage that far surpassed ordinary people. As the saying goes, where there is life, there is hope. As long as one's cultivation reached the golden core stage and above, one's life was more important than anything else. The cultivation of immortal cultivators was not easy to come by, so how could they so easily give it up for nothing? What was the difference between Qin Shi's current actions and courting death? In order to fight back, he sacrificed his life for nothing. How unwise was such an action? Many people could not help but feel sorry for Qin Shi from the bottom of their hearts. However, even more people were filled with excitement, hoping to witness the fall of a heavenly venerate with their own eyes. With Yu Huan Tianzuan in the lead, the immortal cultivators of the great world quickly arrived at the periphery of the floating islands. The funnel that looked like a canopy of clouds had now turned into a gigantic cloud vortex, enveloping almost all of the floating islands within 1,000 miles. As the heaven and earth spirit Qi continuously flowed into the center of the funnel, the floating island enveloped by the funnel gradually lost its vitality. At this very moment, the cloud vortex above the floating islands was like a ferocious beast from ancient times. Apart from sucking dry all the dragon veins on the floating islands, it also cast a huge psychological shadow on the islanders. This mysterious man who dared to make an enemy of Tiandu had yet to show himself, but the invisible pressure coming from his body weighed down on everyone's hearts like a huge rock. A sense of despair gradually spread through the crowd. It was only after Yu Huan Tianzuan's roar that this huge rock finally fell. Arrogant thief! There's a path to heaven, but you don't want to take it. There's no door to hell, but you insist on coming. Generals of Tiandu, listen to my order. Follow me and set up the soul-capturing formation. This time, we must not let him escape. Yu Huan Tianzuan took the lead and led the 5 divine generals into the cloud vortex like a sharp arrow. His appearance was like a ray of light in the darkness, instantly clearing away the haze in everyone's hearts. The islanders raised their heads to look, and they could not help but reveal an excited expression as if they had just escaped death. In the end, Yu Huan Tianzuan was their spiritual leader. Unlike last time, Yu Huan Tianzuan did not care about his face this time and forced himself to fight Qin Shi one-on-one. Instead, he assumed a group fighting stance. However, when he rushed into the clouds, he suddenly realized that Qin Shi's aura seemed to be much stronger than last time. Thinking of this, Yu Huan Tianzuan's face could not help but flash a trace of surprise, and a sense of uneasiness arose in his heart. However, when Miaofa and Xian Zhen arrived, this feeling of uneasiness was thrown out of his mind in the blink of an eye. He was just a defeated opponent. Could it be that he could pierce through the sky today? For safety reasons, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not recklessly rush in alone. He was afraid of falling into Chen Shi's ambush, so he immediately said to Miaofa and Xian Zhen, "This person's behavior today is really strange. I'm afraid it's a trap. The two of you, follow me to find out what's going on." Hearing this, Miaofa and Xian Zhen immediately nodded, then summoned their magic weapons and rushed into the depths of the clouds with Yuhuan Tianzuan side by side. At the same time, Chen Shi, who was in the center of the vortex, slowly opened his eyes. As soon as he opened his eyes, the vortex formed by the spiritual energy above him began to rotate rapidly, and then poured down on him at a speed visible to the naked eye. There was no grand and unique scene of a breakthrough. When the vital essence in Chen Shi's body accumulated to a certain level, he, who had mastered the true meaning of the word void, naturally broke through to the divine transformation stage, and then directly stepped into the Dongshu stage. The moment Chen Shi stepped into the Dongshu stage, a faint golden light suddenly lit up on his eyebrows. From afar, it was a bit like when Erlang Shen opened his heavenly eye in the TV series. Then, this golden light gradually converged between Chen Shi's eyebrows, and then completely disappeared. This was the first law of heaven and earth that he had mastered, also known as the divine mark. Once the divine mark appeared, the Dongshu stage would appear. Chen Shi deliberately restrained his aura, so Yuhuan Tianzuan did not notice anything strange. When enemies meet, naturally, their eyes would be exceptionally red. Even though they were still far away, the two sides did not even say a word. As the saying goes, my brother Long is ruthless and doesn't talk much. The moment he saw Chen Shi, Yuhuan Tianzuan viciously threw the jade-glazed cup in his hand at him. It was still the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. Seeing this, Chen Shi did not even condense the divine sword Dharma power. He directly formed a sword with his fingers, and then slashed at the three lanterns. It was still the first move of the moonlight sword technique. But after this sword slash, it instantly sucked away the little remaining spiritual chi in the surroundings, causing a strange vacuum to appear where the sword slash passed. This was the difference between the divine transformation stage and the Dongshu stage. If the divine transformation stage was compared to nitroglycerin, then the Dongshu stage was obviously nuclear fusion. There was a fundamental difference between the two. Therefore, the moment Chen Shi's sword slash hit the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man, an explosion that was beyond everyone's imagination occurred. With a loud boom, the three lanterns were sent flying back. The three heavenly lords who were closely related to the three lanterns seemed to have been severely injured, and a strange flush appeared on their faces. Please remember the domain name of this book, 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version website. Chapter 437. Above the floating islands. The huge cloud vortex obscured everyone's vision. They did not dare to approach the vortex, so they quietly floated around it. Looking up, the densely packed figures were like a swarm of locusts, almost covering half the sky. Just like the audience in the Colosseum in Rome, these descendants of ancient cultivators did not dare to make any noise, but there was still an inexplicable fanaticism in their eyes. Everyone wanted to witness the fall of a heavenly venerable with their own eyes. But no one expected that in addition to witnessing the fall of a heavenly venerable, they would also be fortunate enough to witness the birth of an ancient legend. With the arrival of the three heavenly venerables, Yu Huan, Miaofa, and Xian Zhen, a gap was torn in the cloud vortex that covered the sky. The three heavenly venerables were like three sharp arrows with tricolored divine flames on them as they shot straight at the enemy in the depths of the vortex. For a moment, the golden myriad spirit ancient E, the purple sky incinerating purple flame, and the grayish-green netherworld ghost flame all bloomed with their own unique brilliance. The three flames intertwined and rose, burning fiercely, almost instantly burning away a large portion of the cloud vortex. At the same time, it also cleared the vision of the spectators. And it was precisely because of this clear vision that everyone witnessed what happened next with their own eyes. After the green sword light and the tricolored divine flame collided in the air, it was like a sharp sword piercing through a glass window. It strangely felt like a mirror shattering in the void. Boom! Following a huge explosion, a formless shockwave spread out. Wherever the shockwave went, spiritual energy surged and wreaked havoc. The spectators closer to the center of the battlefield felt as if their chests had been hit by a battering ram. They were actually sent flying by this invisible force just like that. All of you, back off. Back off at least 5 kilometers. Divine generals of 5 directions, listen up. No one is allowed to come near this place. Fortunately, there were not only 3 heavenly venerables present today. The 7 heavenly venerables, including Yujiang, Taihua, and Yinghua, who had arrived later, saw the intensity of the battle and simultaneously pulled up a protective barrier around the periphery, saving many people in time. Although it was only the first move, the intensity of this battle was far greater than the battle on Dragon Head Peak. Feeling the powerful true essence fluctuations, the 7 celestial venerables' faces suddenly flashed with a trace of surprise. It was no wonder that Yu Huan would put on such a solemn expression. If it was a one-on-one battle, it was likely that none of the 10 Empyreans present were his match. In a battle between experts, one move was enough to determine the truth. The 7 celestial venerables merely watched the battle from afar and did not personally step forward to fight with Qin Shi, so their feelings were naturally not as vivid as those of the 3 celestial venerables present. Qin Shi's seemingly casual slash, other than forcing the heaven, earth, and man lanterns to retreat, he had also directly injured the 3 celestial venerables who were related to the lives of the 3 lanterns. How could Yu Huan Tianzuan not be shocked? It wasn't like he hadn't fought with Qin Shi before. When he fought Qin Shi, who was at the peak of the soul formation stage, he didn't have the upper hand, but it wasn't as if he had no chance of winning. But now, Qin Shi was fighting against 3 celestial venerables alone, but he could still easily injure them? How was this possible? At this moment, not only was Yu Huan Tianzuan shocked, but even the 2 celestial venerables, Miao Fa and Xian Zhen, were filled with shock and uncertainty. The 3 of them hesitated, and the scene temporarily returned to its original calm. Seeing this, Qin Shi wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he slowly flew up until he was at the same height as the 3 celestial venerables. Only then did he speak loudly to everyone present. This humble one is Qin Shi. I've already met all of you before, so I don't think I need to introduce myself too much, right? Actually, I've always wanted to sit down and talk with all of you, but you didn't even give me a chance to speak. I originally had no intention of making an enemy out of Tiandu. I just wanted to borrow the sky-bearing impersonation technique and use the floating dawn mirror. If all of you are reasonable, you should understand that you shouldn't make an enemy out of me for no reason. At this point, Qin Shi suddenly paused. Then, he looked at Yu Huan Tianzuan and said calmly, also, I want to clarify that, I didn't kill Wushu. After hearing this, a trace of doubt flashed across Yu Huan Tianzuan's face. He frowned and seemed to want to say something, but then he heard Qin Shi continue. So what I want to say now is, if all of you are willing to talk, then I can give all of you another chance. Let's turn weapons of war into gifts of jade and silk, so as to avoid increasing the sin of killing. If not, everyone, please don't blame my sword for being merciless. Although Qin Shi wasn't an unforgiving evil person, he wasn't a good person with a gentle temperament either. If the mysterious woman hadn't saved him, he would have died with hatred in his heart. Therefore, although his words seemed reasonable, in reality, he didn't leave any face for the 10 celestial venerables. This was deliberately embarrassing for Tiandu. Of course, if the other party honestly lowered their heads and admitted their mistakes, Qin Shi could indeed consider letting them live. But, with the lofty status of the 10 celestial venerables, how could they easily lower their heads to others? What? Don't we, the 10 celestial venerables, need face? If they really agreed to Qin Shi's request today, then how would the 10 of them face the generals of Tiandu in the future? How would they continue to rule the outside world with the face? From the beginning, Qin Shi had already calculated the thoughts of the 10 celestial venerables. The reason why he wasted his breath was actually just to give himself a good reason to make a move so that he could be more decisive when he took action later. Speaking of which, Qin Shi was really a little mischievous, as expected. It would have been better if he hadn't said those words. After saying that, the 10 celestial venerables' expressions changed greatly. Among them, celestial venerable Sun Blaze, who had the most fiery temper, was so angry that he directly summoned his natal magic treasure, heaven-splitting axe. After that, Celestial Venerable Sunblaze ignored Celestial Venerable Yu Zhang's obstruction and rushed toward Qin Shi with his giant axe. Little thief, don't be so arrogant. Yu Huan, you guys watch on the sidelines for now. Let me deal with him alone. Yu Huan, Miaofa, and Xianjun couldn't gain any advantage over Qin Shi, but Celestial Venerable Sunblaze didn't believe it. He raised his giant axe and fiercely chopped at Qin Shi. Axes were different from swords. They were designed to be heavy and powerful, and must kill in one hit. Therefore, as Celestial Venerable Sunblaze chopped down with his axe, a strong wind immediately blew in the air. In terms of power, it was even more ferocious than the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. This kind of fighting style that only focused on killing and disregarded defense was actually very rare among immortal cultivators. Celestial Venerable Sunblaze relied on the indomitable fierceness in his bones to fight for the position of Celestial Venerable. Therefore, even if his cultivation wasn't at the top of the 10 Celestial Venerables, not many people dared to casually fight with him. He was a living brute. But today, this brute met an opponent who was even more reckless than him. Come on. Seeing that the giant axe was about to arrive, Qin Shi's face suddenly flashed with a trace of excitement. He made a grabbing motion with his left hand, and a saber-like materialization weapon condensed in his hand. Then, Qin Shi held the saber in his hand and directly faced the giant axe. Using strength to overcome strength. Using force to meet force. He wanted to take this opportunity to gauge the absolute power that he now possessed. Chapter 438. Just as Celestial Master Blazing Sun was wielding his heaven-splitting axe and using all his strength to execute the 36 moves of the Heavenly Dipper axe technique, Qin Shi's mood could be accurately described with one idiom, and that was, elation at the sight of a prey. Different cultivation methods would naturally lead to different combat habits for immortal cultivators. Based on Qin Shi's previous combat style, when faced with such a ferocious cultivation technique, Qin Shi would definitely not meet it head-on. Instead, he would constantly twist and turn and restrain his opponent until he found a flaw in his opponent's aura. Only then would he decisively strike with his sword, hoping to achieve the desired result in one strike. The axe technique was ferocious, while the sword technique was nimble. Each of the 18 types of martial arts had their own unique characteristics. It was not easy to judge which one was better and which one was worse. It was also because of the characteristics of the axe technique that Celestial Master Blazing Sun's move was not necessarily exquisite. However, it was definitely incomparably violent. Even if Yu Huan and the others joined forces, they did not dare to meet it head-on. Of course, just because Yu Huan and the others did not dare to meet it head-on did not mean that Qin Shi did not dare to meet it head-on. This was his first battle after stepping into the insightful emptiness realm, so he naturally treated this battle as a testing ground for his sword. Therefore, Qin Shi abandoned the sword technique he was most proficient in and instead used the Red Sun Saber technique, which he had not used often before. He was prepared to meet Celestial Master Blazing Sun's axe head-on, hoping to see how much progress he had made. Therefore, the moment he raised his hand and swung his saber, Saber Chi was born, instantly cutting through the void and soaring into the sky. At the same time, the area within a radius of several hundred feet was shrouded in Saber Chi, as if it wanted to destroy everything within range. It was impossible to dodge and was at the mercy of others. And this was the third move of the Red Sun Saber technique. One saber cleaves the sky, one with the saber. Great clumsiness turned into simplicity, one saber was enough. As the heaven-splitting axe came crashing down, a bright saber light with a hint of coldness shot out from the tip of the saber. Then, with an incomparably violent and domineering aura, it slashed directly at the incoming Celestial Master Blazing Sunday. At this moment, almost all the spectators, including the 10 Celestial Masters, could not help but hold their breaths, for fear of missing any exciting scenes. However, what happened next disappointed them. For some unknown reason, the moment the tip of the saber touched the edge of the axe, the giant axe formed from Celestial Venerate Sunblaze's true Yuan Qi melted like snow under the blazing sun and slowly dissipated into the void. This feeling was very strange. It was as if one side was holding a tempered steel knife, while the other side was holding an axe carved out of ice. Therefore, as soon as the two came into contact, the axe shattered into countless ice shards. Sigh, seeing this, Qinshi sighed silently. In the end, he still couldn't hold it in. After all, how could he, who had already grasped the laws of heaven and earth, be like before, only rely on the enormous amount of true essence to fight? If that was the case, wouldn't a Dongshu stage Xiaoxianus become a brute with nothing but brute strength? In fact, the moment Heavenly Venerate Sunblaze swung his axe, Qinshi saw numerous law threads on his body. Therefore, he only needed to cut off one of them to easily neutralize Heavenly Sovereign Sunblaze's attack. Until this moment, Qinshi finally understood the gap between the Divine Transformation stage and the Dongshu stage. True Yuan was no longer the only standard to measure one's strength. Understanding and grasping the laws of heaven and earth was the direction he needed to study in the future. The more laws he grasped, the closer he was to the Great Tao. So, unknowingly, he had already reached this step. Thinking of this, Qinshi's excitement from his breakthrough immediately calmed down. When he turned his head to look at Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others again, there was only a pale feeling left in his heart. That was dull and uninteresting. So what if they were Tiandu? So what if they had more people? They were no longer on the same level. The reason was simple. It was like an adult fighting kindergarten children. Even if there were 100 children standing opposite him, he wouldn't feel any pleasure after destroying them. Punch at the Nanshan nursing home, kick at the Beihai kindergarten. This was just a joke. Perhaps this was the after effect of advancing to the next level. At this moment, in Qinshi's eyes, this great world that carried all the hopes of the ancient cultivators was no different from the Beihai kindergarten. He silently looked around the room. Wherever he looked, the other party would reveal a nervous and somewhat flustered expression. It was just a casual slash. Heavenly Sovereign Sunblaze, who was known for his martial prowess in the divine capital, was seriously injured. Now, he had been brought back to the Dragon Head Peak by the divine generals to heal. Seeing this, the remaining 9 heavenly sovereigns immediately took out their life magic treasures as if they were facing a great enemy. They were prepared for any possible attacks from Qinshi. For a moment, there was a strange silence. When Qinshi saw their laughable expressions, he couldn't help but think of the mysterious woman in the dark space. Perhaps in the eyes of that mysterious woman, he should be as insignificant and laughable as these people in front of him, right? The Great Tao was endless. There was always a mountain higher than another. If he didn't jump into this small pond, he would never know how high the sky was and how wide the earth was. Thinking of the realm that the mysterious woman might reach, even Qinshi couldn't help but yearn for it. However, yearning was yearning, reality was reality. The reality was, Yingying was still waiting for him to save her. Niannian was still waiting for him to go home. What were they waiting for? Therefore, after seeing the remaining 9 heavenly sovereigns take out their life magic treasures, Qinshi couldn't help but smile at them and say, "All of you come together, I'm in a hurry." As soon as his voice fell, a divine sword appeared in his right hand. Then, Qinshi held a sword in one hand and a saber in the other and took the initiative to rush toward the 10 heavenly sovereigns in front of him. Don't be afraid. Everyone, attack together. This old man really doesn't believe that he can overturn the heavens. Yuhuan Tianzuan was also a ruthless person. Although he didn't understand why Qinshi was able to defeat Heavenly Sovereign Yang Yan in one move, he didn't have any intention of retreating. Instead, when he saw Qinshi make a move, he took the lead to face him. It was still the same 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man combined attack. But this time, they were not facing Qinshi, who was at the peak of the semi-god realm. It was Qinshi, who was at the early stage of the void transformation realm and already had killing intent in his heart. I've already given you a chance, it's you who didn't cherish it, then don't blame me for being ruthless. After saying that, Qinshi couldn't help but let out a long roar towards the sky, and the sword in his hand suddenly glowed with a faint cold light. The third move of the combination of sword and saber. The saber was formless, the sword was formless, and the vast expanse of heaven and earth could be shattered. Chapter 439. 3 Styles of Saber, 3 Styles of Sword. 3 Styles of Saber and Sword. 3 Styles of Endless, 9 Styles of Returning to One. As soon as he finished speaking, Qin held the sword in his right hand and the saber in his left. With a shocking momentum, he charged toward the 10 celestial sages not far away. At this moment, one of the 10 celestial sages was injured. Although the remaining 9 were a little worried about the strength that Qin had shown before, after being provoked by Qin again and again, the 9 celestial sages were obviously completely provoked. Evil thief, don't be so arrogant. This is the hinterland of Tiandu, under the shadow of the divine ancestor. How can you be so presumptuous? Everyone, let's take him down together. By Su Qingtian's order. As Yuhuan Tianzuan's words fell, the 9 of them no longer cared about their identity and almost simultaneously took out their famous natal magic treasures. As various magic treasures flew out of their hands, the field suddenly shone brilliantly, showing the mighty divine power. Seeing that the battle was about to start, even the 5 divine generals, whose strength was second only to the celestial sages, retreated 10 miles away at this moment, not daring to take half a step forward. After all, this was a battle of the celestial sages. It was also the first time that the 10 celestial sages had joined forces to deal with one person. Therefore, no matter the result, today's battle was enough to be called unprecedentedly brilliant. Perhaps it was to make this battle more legendary. The moment Qin raised the saber and sword in his hand, even time seemed to stop flowing, and everything in the void was silent. The third style of the divine skill, combination of saber and sword, the saber is formless. The sword is formless, the vast expanse shatters heaven and earth. When he was still in the heavenly jade world, Qin had already used this move. However, at that time, he had not comprehended the true meaning of the word void, so he could only force the move with a huge amount of vital essence. At this moment, Qin finally stepped into the insightful void realm. Therefore, when he used this move again, he suddenly had a different feeling in his heart. It turned out that this move actually involved the application of the laws of heaven and earth, and could only be smoothly used by those above the insightful void realm. The saber is formless, the sword is formless. Its purpose was to shatter heaven and earth. Qin swung the sword and saber in his hand, and endless saber and sword qi burst out in the void. Aura fluctuations could not be concealed, so the celestial venerables immediately felt that there seemed to be thousands of swords slowly forming in front of him. However, when they focused their gazes, they did not find anything strange. That was because this move had qi but was formless. It was exactly the same as that sentence. The blade was formless, and the sword was formless. The qi of the saber and sword, which contained the essence of the word void, was like a huge net in the void, suddenly covering the 9 celestial venerables. The 9 celestial venerables did not notice anything strange. Only when the net of qi from the saber and sword came crashing down did everyone realize that they had fallen into Qin's trap. There was almost no warning. It was as if they had stepped into a void, and there was no end to their surroundings. Yuhuan Tianzuan tried to struggle, but found that he couldn't. It was as if he was trapped by something invisible. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan couldn't help but widen his eyes slightly. He quickly mobilized all the true qi in his body, trying to forcibly break free from the shackles. However, at this moment, his body suddenly felt pain, and countless bloody marks suddenly burst out all over his body. As if falling into a red dye vat, the 9 celestial venerables' clothes were instantly soaked with blood. Even with the protection of treasures, it was difficult for them to withstand the power of this move. Because this move was simply unpredictable and impossible to dodge. It was hidden in the void. If one did not comprehend the essence of the word void, it was basically impossible to detect it. And this was the terrifying part of the third divine skill. Turning nothingness into something, the world was filled with saber and sword qi, formless and formless. At this moment, it was a flower. At that moment, it was a bird. At the next moment, it was a scorching sun in the sky. From the perspective of a bystander, it was as if nothing had happened. However, the 9 celestial venerables' bodies were oozing blood very strangely. Just as everyone was feeling a little puzzled, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly looked up to the sky and let out a fierce howl. Then, he gritted his teeth and ignited a drop of blood essence in his body. One had to admit that this old man did have some eyesight. Once he saw that the situation was not right, he actually directly put on a desperate posture. At the price of burning his blood essence, he forcefully tore a gap in Chen Shi's saber and sword chi net. After escaping, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not waste any time. He directly recalled the Jade World glazed cup and then used the ancient spirit Yi to save the few celestial venerables beside him. Yuhuan, you? Looking at Yuhuan Tianzuan, who was covered in blood chi, a trace of shock appeared on Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell's face. Hearing that, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not immediately reply. Instead, he looked at Chen Shi with eyes full of resentment. This person is not the same as before. He must have had some fortuitous encounter and stepped into the legendary supreme stage. This sentence was like a bucket of cold water poured over their heads, instantly extinguishing the burning battle intent in their hearts. Supreme stage. That was an existence that surpassed Empyreans. Ever since the grand pure saint ancestor passed away, the strength of the great world had begun to decline. It had been a long time since a supreme stage existence had appeared. Thinking of this, everyone couldn't help but look at each other. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not give them too much time to think. Instead, he continued, this person is not from our Tiandu. He is an external enemy. If we avoid him, how will we have the face to worship the sacred ancestor in the future? Tiandu's 10,000 years of inheritance, the sacred ancestor's illustrious name, is it going to be destroyed in our hands today? This old man is unwilling, and also unwilling. Only because, I am one of the 10 Empyreans of Tiandu. These words were so beautiful that it was as if the 8 Empyreans present had been injected with chicken blood. Their faces immediately surged with boundless pride. That's right. So what if you're a sovereign? Since we are the 10 Empyreans of Tiandu, how can we easily lower our heads to others? This seemingly long and tedious conversation actually happened in the blink of an eye. Therefore, just as Chen Shi was about to deliver the final blow, the remaining 8 Empyreans actually ignited the blood essence in their bodies. In an instant, the true essence fluctuations caused by the 9 Empyreans burning their blood essence were like the setting sun dyeing a large area of the sky red. Seeing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but flash a trace of admiration on his face. Immortal cultivators couldn't lose their courage. He didn't expect that the 10 Empyreans had been in high positions for so many years, but the sword in their hearts hadn't rusted because of this. His opponent was so valiant, how could he fall behind? Therefore, this time, Chen Shi didn't think of avoiding the spearhead at all. Instead, he immediately brandished his sword to meet it. At this point, the result of this battle was destined to be a fight to the death. Then, the 10 Empyreans united and displayed all that they had learned in their lives. They charged towards the legendary supreme stage in their strongest state. And Chen Shi displayed the elegance of the void stage. With his own strength, he fought 9 soul formation stage cultivators who were burning their blood essence and risking their lives. This battle was unprecedentedly bright. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 440. As the battle gradually reached its climax, earth-shattering explosions rang out one after another. The multicolored True Yuan was like an aurora, slowly flowing in the air above the floating island. As long as the true essence energy came into contact with Chen Shi's saber and sword chi net, it would explode with a blinding light. The scene was like magnesium powder meeting fire. Shockwaves would always follow the explosion. Wave after wave of shockwaves crashed into the nearby floating islands, causing the islands below to tremble violently. If not for the fact that both sides were virtuous enough to subconsciously carve out a few moves before making a move, countless floating islands would have already been smashed to pieces. This was a battle between heavenly venerables. Although it looked like a dazzling battle, it actually contained countless murderous intents. Thus, even from 5 kilometers away, the spectators could still feel an extremely powerful murderous intent. No one dared to take a step forward. As long as they came into contact with the saber and sword Chinet or the rainbow divine light, they would definitely be shredded into pieces. Almost everyone's hearts tightened, including the 10 heavenly venerables. Because there was a time limit to burning blood essence. Not only did Chen Shi know this, but even the 9 heavenly venerables knew this very well. Time was of the essence, so the 9 of them wanted to use all their strength to defeat Chen Shi in one fell swoop before the blood essence was completely burned. But how could Chen Shi let them do as they wished so easily? Perhaps it was because Heavenly Venerable Sun Blaze was absent, but the 10 Directions Immortal Extermination formation that the 9 Heavenly Venerables had set up was clearly lacking in maturity. After grasping the true meaning of the word void, Chen Shi could always immediately discover the flaws in the 9 Heavenly Venerables' joint attacks even if he didn't deliberately pay attention to them. Thus, the 9 Heavenly Venerables' joint attacks were always easily resolved by Chen Shi. The 9 of them working together still couldn't hurt Chen Shi. Once the blood essence was completely burned, what would they use to deal with him? At this thought, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately became impatient. Even the frequency of his attacks became more and more hurried. However, being impatient wouldn't help at all. Instead, it would only expose his shortcomings even more quickly. After the two sides had exchanged more than 1,000 moves, Chen Shi deliberately revealed a flaw and pretended to be pinned down by Empyrean Yujiang. At the same time, he deliberately exposed his back to Empyrean Yuhuan. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan fell for it. The old man felt that the opportunity was not to be missed, so he directly broke out of the formation and viciously smashed the glass cup at Chen Shi's back. As the Jade Universe glazed cup flew out of his hand, the 10 Directions Immortal Slaying formation, which had been greatly weakened due to Celestial Venerable Sunblaze's absence, immediately fell apart. At this time, Chen Shi seemed to have expected this. He suddenly forced Wondrous Spell Heavenly Lord back with a slash of his saber. Then, he decisively pulled back his sword, allowing the sword that had been accumulating power for a long time to point directly at Yuhuan Tianzuan. Yuhuan Tianzuan only saw a cold light flash before his eyes. He didn't even have time to defend himself before the sword pierced through his protective aura and through his body, drawing a long line of blood in the air. Pooh! After suffering such a heavy blow, Yuhuan Tianzuan lost his ability to fight on the spot and instantly fell from the sky. If Heavenly Lord Yinghua hadn't reacted quickly and caught him in time, Yuhuan Tianzuan would have fallen directly into the endless void below. The formation has been broken. We are in danger. Everyone, quickly retreat to the Imperial Hall and regroup. We will wait for an opportunity. Go quickly. I will stop him. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell was indeed somewhat courageous. Seeing that the 10 Directions Immortal Slaying formation had collapsed due to Yuhuan Tianzuan's injuries, he advanced instead of retreating. He held the 8 Views Palace lantern and brazenly faced Chen Shi. However, Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, who was only at the early stage of soul formation, couldn't block Chen Shi, who was at the early stage of void transformation, even if he burned his blood essence. Thus, in the instant that the other 7 people turned around and flew away with Yuhuan Tianzuan, Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, who was covering for them, was struck by Chen Shi's sword. As a result, he fell from the sky and heavily smashed into the floating island below. 1,000-mile journey collapsed because of an ant's nest. Because of Yuhuan Tianzuan's momentary mistake, the 10 Directions Celestial Lords were instantly defeated. In gaming terms, that would be, the configuration of their formation was too low, and the margin for error was almost zero. A single mistake would instantly cause them to be wiped out. After Chen Shi defeated Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, he didn't rush to finish him off. Instead, he immediately chased after the 8 fleeing Celestial Lords. Seeing this, Heavenly Lord Yujiang, who was the strongest among them, decisively stepped forward and replaced Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell to cover for everyone. However, Chen Shi was like a madman who had gone berserk. As soon as the two of them met, Heavenly Lord Yujiang was slashed down by his sword and fell straight into the void below. Wondrous Spell and Yujiang fell one after another. Even if they excluded the heavily injured Yu Huan, there were still 6 people left. Thus, Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen stepped forward. They couldn't delay for too long, but this method of covering the rear greatly lengthened the battle line. As a result, after Qin Shi repelled Xuanzhen with his sword, Dragon Head Peak appeared not far in front of them. At this moment, Qin Shi didn't need to think with his but to know. They were going to activate the Great Sun Moon Star Formation. Since this formation was the final killing move that the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had left behind for Tian Capital, it must have its unique features. Qin Shi didn't think that he was a match for the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, so he deliberately lured everyone to the periphery of the floating islands. His goal was to make the 10 Heavenly Venerables stay away from the Imperial Polarity Hall and prevent them from activating the formation at any time. Qin Shi had achieved his goal. However, he still didn't expect. The 10 Heavenly Venerables, who held high positions, would have the courage to burn their blood essence and sacrifice themselves at the same time. Xuanzhen fell. Yinghua stepped forward again. The Heavenly Venerables, who used to be high and mighty, fell one after another, but the remaining few stood up resolutely and continued to cover the rear for their companions. Although they couldn't block 1 or 2 moves from Qin Shi, they could create some obstacles for Qin Shi and buy some time for everyone to escape. When only 3 Heavenly Venerables were left beside Yu Huan, the group of 4 finally flew to Dragon Head Peak. For Tian Capital, for the Divine Ancestor's reputation. Go, Yu Huan. We'll do our best to buy time for you. A fierce look flashed across the Taihua Heavenly Venerable's face. Then, he and the other 2 Heavenly Venerables turned to face Qin Shi, who was chasing after them with a sword. Seeing this, Qin Shi couldn't help but yell fiercely, "Get lost!" The battle was coming to an end. As long as the 3 people in front of him were defeated, Tian Capital would have no chance of counterattacking. Therefore, Qin Shi no longer held back and decisively used his killing move. The saber was formless, the sword was formless, and the vast expanse could shatter the universe. The sound came with the sword, its momentum unparalleled. The 3 Heavenly Venerables with the lowest cultivation didn't even have time to scream before they were completely pulverized by the billions of saber lights and sword shadows. However, it was also because they risked their lives to stop Yu Huan. Tianzuan successfully flew to the front of the Imperial Polarity Hall. As soon as he landed, Yu Huan Tianzuan suddenly let out a long howl and slammed his palm into the center of the square. In an instant, the entire floating island trembled violently. Feeling the tremors from Dragon Head Peak, Yu Huan Tianzuan couldn't help but tremble with excitement. After tens of thousands of years of silence, the array pattern that the Divine Ancestor personally engraved on the square finally showed its brilliance to the world. Divine Ancestor above. The Emperor's majestic North Tower, the Divine Ancestor's vast kindness shakes the southern sky. Fortunately, we did not disappoint you. Chapter 441. I wish everyone a happy new year. I'm sure you'll be rich this year. It's New Year's Day, so all my relatives and friends will come over to play. I'm busy cooking at home, so I really can't write. I hope everyone can bear with me in the new year. I'll remember to update it. I'll update it at night and in the morning. I'm so moral. Happy New Year, returning from cultivation to become a stay-at-home dad. Please wait a moment. After the content is updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 442. As Yu Huan Tianzuan slammed his palm down, the formation runes engraved on the plaza began to glow. Just as Qin Shi had expected, this formation was indeed the final killing move left behind by the Pure Sky Saint Ancestor for Tiandu. Ever since the Pure Sky Saint Ancestor led the ancient cultivators to build Tiandu, this formation had been engraved on Dragon Head Peak. But what was strange was that the ancient books left behind by the Pure Sky Saint Ancestor did not record any description of this formation, so no one knew what this formation was used for. Perhaps it was an illusion formation, perhaps it was a killing formation. In short, it should not be activated unless it was absolutely necessary. Speaking of which, it was important to mention something important. It was not that Qin Shi did not want to stop the formation from activating, but that he could not stop it at all. Unless he could kill the 10 celestial venerables in one move, the 10 celestial venerables would activate the formation at the most dangerous moment. This was a paradox in itself. After all, the formation carried Tiandu's last hope and was also the foundation of Tiandu's standing in the great world. Just like playing cards, when Yuhuan Tianzuan lost everything, he would naturally place his hopes on this trump card. And now, it was time to reveal this trump card. It had to be said that this trump card was indeed somewhat extraordinary. As the formation runes on the plaza appeared one after another, the great sun-moon star formation above the floating islands suddenly dimmed a lot, and the entire great world fell into darkness. Seeing this, Qin could not help but be on guard and carefully analyze the changes in order to find the location of the formation's life gate as soon as possible. Whether it was an illusion formation or a killing formation, there would usually be 2 life and death gates when setting it up. On one hand, it was to prevent the formation from covering their allies, and on the other hand, it was convenient for the person setting up the formation to enter and exit the formation. But what made Qin feel a little strange was, the formation in front of him did not seem to have 2 life and death gates. As soon as the formation was activated, one after another, flickering lines of law slowly appeared in the void. Even if Yuhuan Tianzuan had not grasped the true meaning of the word void, he could still see these lines of law with his naked eye. Of course, in Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes, these lines of law were just waves of vital essence. The lines of law crisscrossed in the void. From afar, it looked like a large net covering the entire great world. Then, these lines of law tightened, and the 120,000 floating islands became fish and shrimps in the net. At the same time, the soul mirror stored in the Imperial Hall suddenly released a dazzling golden light, and flew to the center of the plaza with a whoosh. The formation runes in the center was a circular shape, with a circular hole in the middle. After the soul mirror flew, it directly landed on the circular hole. Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan stared blankly at everything before him. Although the formation to Tianzuan was it to the sky, to it to was. However, just as he was absent-minded, the soul mirror actually automatically combined with the formation patterns. Immediately after, an extremely intense true essence fluctuation erupted, and actually blasted Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan flying far away all of a sudden. Something unexpected happened. The great world. The 120,000 floating islands began to shake violently under the influence of an unknown force. The spirit energy on the floating islands originated from the dragon veins on the various islands, but now, these dragon veins were like a volcanic eruption, gushing out and gathering at the peak of Dragon Head Peak. The spirit energy surged crazily in one place, and for a moment, it caused an unprecedented spirit energy tide in the great world. Seeing this, Qin no longer cared about snatching the soul mirror, and turned to leave the center of the storm that had yet to form. But what he didn't expect was, even though he had already stepped into the insightful emptiness realm, he was still like a 3-year-old child in front of the Grand Pure One's laws. He couldn't use brute force to tear open this gradually tightening net. The inescapable net formed by the lines of law tightened, and the 120,000 floating islands gathered in one place. The floating islands in the center were still fine, as there was still some space between them, so no collisions occurred. But the floating islands at the edge were in trouble. Many of the floating islands were pushed by the net, and they collided with the nearest floating islands. The scene was so tragic that it was like a serial car accident on the highway. In an instant, mountains collapsed, the earth cracked, and rocks flew. The residents on the islands were howling in grief. After seeing the tragic situation at the periphery of the floating islands, Yuhuan Tianzuan felt a chill run down his back, and his heart was filled with inexplicable fear. He would never have thought, the formation left behind by the Grand Pure One was not to defend against enemies, but to destroy Heaven Capital's foundation. Grand Pure One, could this be the last hope you left for Heaven Capital? Hope. Ha 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 ha. Seeing the floating islands in the distance continuously colliding and sinking, Yuhuan Tianzuan was filled with despair. He wanted to use this opportunity to turn the tables, but who would have thought, the result would be like this? After receiving such a blow, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly seemed to have gone crazy, and he couldn't help but sit at the edge of the square and laugh wildly. Unlike Yu Huan Tianzuan's despair, Qin Shi seemed to have realized the crux of the matter. Thus, he immediately turned and rushed toward the soul mirror in the center of the square, and at the same time, he slashed out with his sword in an attempt to destroy it. Qin Shi had used 10% of his strength in this attack. But after he slashed out, the soul mirror embedded in the center of the square was like a black hole, and it almost instantly swallowed up the sword light. Even a stone thrown into the water would cause a splash, but Qin Shi's sword light did not even cause a ripple. Seeing this, Qin Shi did not panic. Instead, he continued to slash at the soul mirror, trying to forcibly stop the formation's operation. But no matter how many times he slashed, the result was the same. As soon as the sword light approached the soul mirror, it seemed to be affected by something and was directly swallowed up by the soul mirror. It did not even cause the slightest movement, and it disappeared without a trace. And just as Qin Shi was thinking about how to destroy the formation patterns in the square suddenly emitted a faint energy fluctuation like an energy cannon that had been fully charged. Qin Shi sensed that something was wrong. Just as he was about to take a closer look, the soul mirror in the center of the square suddenly emitted a blinding light. The light was so strong that it was not inferior to the sun. Qin Shi subconsciously blinked. But at this moment, an extremely strong gravitational force suddenly came from where the soul mirror was. Qin Shi was caught off guard and was directly pulled to the ground by this gravitational force. At the same time, all the floating islands that were enveloped by the light were like space stations that had lost control and were rapidly flying toward the center of the light. Chapter 443. A beam of light suddenly shot out from Dragon Head Peak, followed by an extremely powerful gravitational force. This gravitational force was so strong that it could even drag Qin Shi down from the sky, let alone other objects in the great world. No one or object could resist this powerful gravitational force. It seemed to have combined all the spiritual energy in the great world. The moment the light appeared, it pulled all 120,000 floating islands to the vicinity of Dragon Head Peak. The scene was so spectacular that it could be described as hundreds of barges and thousands of sails competing. One after another, the floating islands collided in the void. Each collision would set off an earth-shattering boom, accompanied by the cries and wails of countless living beings. Many of the weaker cultivators were turned into dust on the spot in the collision. Even those with higher cultivation, such as the 5 divine generals, could not escape the pull of the strong light even though they could successfully avoid the collision of the peaks. This scene was very similar to a flush toilet. One only needed to gently press the switch, and all the filth and turbidity in the world would rush into the sewer along with the rapid flow of water. Yu Huan Tianzuan, who was closest to the strong light, was the first to disappear. He did not even have the time to scream before he was sucked away by the strong light in the blink of an eye. Immediately after, the Imperial Extreme Hall also turned into thousands of dust and debris and disappeared into the strong light. Then, the flowers, trees, sand, and stones on Dragon Head Peak, whether it was birds, beasts, divine generals, or star lords, as long as they were enveloped by the strong light, they would be instantly sucked in and completely disappear. This strong light was like a white hole, crazily devouring everything in the great world. After swallowing Dragon Head Peak, it began to devour the surrounding floating islands as if it would never be full. Qin Shi bitterly resisted the strong gravitational force brought about by the strong light. He looked back at the square and found that it had completely turned into a white sphere of light. The strong light came from the central region of this sphere of light, and there was a strange black region at the edge of the sphere that looked like a ribbon in the void. In any case, Qin Shi was someone who had seen big scenes. Therefore, after seeing such a scene, a term immediately popped up in his mind: a white hole. One must know that in the vast universe, in addition to the black hole that could even swallow light, there was also an existence with a completely opposite nature. This was the white hole. To put it simply, if the black hole was the entrance to a certain space, then the white hole would be the exit of this space. The black hole was responsible for swallowing, while the white hole was responsible for spitting. Once the Grand Pure Saint Ancestor's Sun-Moon Star formation was activated, all the objects in the large world would be gradually wrapped up in an inescapable net and stuffed into a white hole. Then, through the white hole, these objects would be sent to another unknown world. She didn't want to be sent to some strange place again. Therefore, when he realized the true function of the formation, he used all his strength and began to struggle madly. In any case, he was at the Dongshu stage. Thus, his efforts played a certain role in the end. As a result, he was able to successfully go against the current and arrive at the border of the heavenly network. The heavenly network was formed by the threads of law. Shi tried to touch it, but realized that these laws weren't something he could control at his current stage. Therefore, he immediately took out the sword in his hand and tried to tear this large net apart with brute force. However, no matter how hard he tried, the large net didn't budge. And as the inescapable net tightened, by the time most of the 120,000 floating islands had been swallowed up, Shi was like a fish in a net. She could only watch in despair as she was continuously dragged towards the white hole by the large net, F***ck. After some time, when Shi regained consciousness, he realized that he was in an unfamiliar vacuum environment. This vacuum environment was different from the dark space Shi had been in before. There were radiation, magnetic fields, rays, and various dust impurities that Shi was familiar with here. He calmed himself down and looked up. To his surprise, there was a gigantic planet beside him. This, Shi was shocked. He immediately flew out of the rubble and came to the star belt of this planet. Earthlings grew up looking at pictures of the 8 major planets in the solar system. Thus, Shi recognized it at a glance. This gigantic planet with a ring around it was none other than Saturn. Had he returned to the solar system? Thinking of this, Shi was suddenly excited. He quickly flew out of the star belt and went straight to the periphery of Saturn. A bright red star entered Shi's eyes, the sun. It really was the sun. The final trump card that the Tai Ching ancestor left for Heaven Capital was actually a teleportation array that led directly to the solar system. Shi looked back and saw that the 120,000 floating islands had all turned into ruins and were completely merged into Saturn's star belt. Yuhuan Tianzuan's aura was still there. Except for Taihua and the other 2 who were killed by Shi, the auras of the remaining 7 heavenly venerables were still there. They did not die because of the activation of the array. However, while the 10 heavenly venerables were fine, the residents of the great world were in trouble. Only those whose cultivation had reached the golden core stage and above could maintain their vitality in the universe and luckily escape this disaster. However, even in Heaven Capital, there were only a few people whose cultivation had reached the golden core stage and above. As for those unlucky people whose cultivation had not reached the golden core stage, right now, they had already turned into ice-cold corpses one after another. There was no pain or wailing. Just like that, they died peacefully the moment the array was activated. There were at least tens of millions of them. Seeing this, even Shi, who had long been accustomed to death, could not help but feel sad at this moment. After this battle, the vitality of the ancient cultivators was greatly damaged. It also almost shook the foundation of Heaven Capital that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years. Shi originally only wanted to go to the great world to find the soul mirror and use it to get Ying back. Who would have thought that this trip would be so complicated? Perhaps, the Tai Ching ancestor had considered the instability of the great world from the beginning, so he deliberately left behind such an arrangement of cutting off the tail to survive and abandoning the rook to save the king. After all, Earth was their home and where their roots lay. Shi's cultivation was the highest, so he woke up the fastest. Thus, he quietly floated in the void and began to seriously consider the next problem of how to deal with the aftermath. Right now, the core strength of Heaven Capital was gathered in the solar system. If he left it alone, even without the 10 heavenly venerables, the 5 divine generals would be enough to flatten the solar system. But if he wanted to eliminate them all in one fell swoop, wouldn't it be too cruel? How should he deal with it? This was really a complicated problem. Chapter 444. Shi hadn't considered the issue of Tiandu's aftermath for too long. After all, he hadn't even settled his own family's affairs, so where would he find the time to care about other people's affairs? He had to find a way to retrieve Ying's soul. That was what Shi needed to do right now. Thus, Shi began a careful search of the ruins of Saturn's ring. Saturn's volume was 830 times that of Earth, and its rings were formed after comets and asteroids collided. Its width alone was 25 times that of Earth's diameter. Thus, when the 120,000 floating islands were thrown into Saturn's rings, it was like sand falling into the sea, not causing any waves at all. Perhaps because the formation had just been activated, the strange energy fluctuations on the soul mirror had completely disappeared. She searched the floating island ruins for a long time, almost inch by inch, before finally finding that damnable mirror in one of the meteorite ruins. The sky-bearing mirror of floating dawn. The soul mirror was buried deep in the soil, so it was inevitable that it was stained with some dust and dirt. Shi summoned it back with his inner energy, and a bone-chilling sensation came as soon as he touched it. In all honesty, the soul mirror really did appear to be a little mundane now that it had lost that unknown energy fluctuation. A dull mirror with a dark yellow frame. If it weren't for the exquisite patterns on the frame, and the mysterious power of the law faintly contained within, Shi wouldn't have believed that this mirror was actually a legendary artifact. Connate peerless treasure. Perhaps this was what they meant by returning to one's natural state. The soul mirror wasn't an offensive treasure, so for Tiandu, its symbolic significance was far greater than its actual significance. When the Sun-Moon Star formation was activated, Shi didn't sense any spiritual fluctuations, so he deduced that the formation had nothing to do with the soul bridge. Whether it was the formation or the soul bridge. Both were meant to travel to Earth, but the methods used were completely different. The Sun-Moon Star formation was too barbaric and crude, and Xian Nu's soul wasn't enough to activate it. Its true source of power was actually all the dragon veins in the great world. That was why when it was activated, it would set off a tidal wave of spiritual qi that was close to landslides and tsunamis. Shi tried to infuse his true essence into the soul mirror, but there was no reaction. Thus, after a moment of hesitation, he separated a strand of his spirit from his heart aperture and carefully poured it into the soul mirror. Shi was already cautious enough. After all, this was a connate cardinal treasure that he had never come into contact with before. But he didn't expect that the moment his spirit entered the mirror, it was as if Shi's soul had been sucked away by the soul mirror, causing him to lose all sense of the outside world. His divine sense entered the soul mirror. It was only then that this connate supreme treasure truly displayed its uniqueness. There was a strange consciousness space within the soul mirror, which was also the place where Xian Nu's soul was stored. As soon as Shi's consciousness entered the soul mirror, he felt as if he'd fallen into the yellow springs or the river Styx. He was surrounded by dense resentment that refused to dissipate. Perhaps his arrival had disturbed the Yin souls that had been imprisoned here for many years, so much so that the resentment of these Yin souls was like bats in a bat cave, and they actually rushed towards him in groups. Shi couldn't help but snort angrily when he saw this. The spiritual pressure of a Dongshu cultivator immediately spread out. Arbiter Xian Nu's cultivation wasn't high to begin with. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she was an ordinary person, so how strong could her soul be? Yin souls didn't have consciousness, but they still retained their instincts to seek good fortune and avoid calamity. Thus, when Shi released his aura, the Yin souls scattered like frightened birds and beasts, not daring to approach him at all. One had to know that the soul mirror and the real world were two completely different concepts. The soul mirror was somewhat similar to a cultivator's sea of consciousness. In this space, the five senses were useless. They could only sense each other through their souls. And in Shi's perception, in this mysterious and strange soul mirror, there was a faint fluctuation of a soul that he was extremely familiar with. Although it was very weak, like a grain of gold in a vast sea of sand, Shi was still able to sense its existence immediately. This was the throbbing of the soul. It was also the bond between two people who truly loved each other. One look and they could see each other. One step was like a heavy city. Love was separated by mountains and seas. The mountains and seas couldn't be leveled. There were boats to cross the seas. There were roads to cross the mountains. This love overturned the mountains and seas. The mountains and seas could be leveled. Chen-shi suddenly looked over. He felt as if there was someone waiting for him in the depths of his sea of consciousness. Thus, he rushed forward without hesitation. Along the way, all the Ean's souls avoided him. Only the fluorescent light still floated silently in the same place. In the blink of an eye, Chen-shi arrived at the position of the fluorescent light. "Ying, is it you? I'm here to pick you up." As he spoke, he tried to reach out to the fluorescent light. However, he completely forgot that he was in a space similar to the heart aperture. There was no way he could directly touch the other party. The fluorescent light couldn't give Chen-shi any response. But from Chen-shi's point of view, there was no need to say anything more. Ying was right in front of him. As long as he brought this fluorescent light back to Earth, Ying would naturally wake up. Their family could also be reunited. Thinking of this, Chen-shi was suddenly very excited. Thus, he immediately used his powerful soul to gently envelop the fluorescent light. Then, he tried to bring it out of this damned soul mirror. But at this time, Chen-shi suddenly realized, this space seemed to only allow entry and not exit. There was no way out. However, after thinking about it for a while, he quickly felt relieved. After all, the spirit mirror was used to store Xian-yin souls. How could they escape so easily? If there was no exit, he could just open one himself. Speaking of which, it was strange, ever since Chen-shi's soul entered the spirit mirror, he completely lost his sense of his physical body. It was as if his physical body and soul were separated. Seeing this, Chen-shi didn't panic at all. At this moment, he had already stepped into the paradise void stage and had grasped the essence of the word void. It was just an ownerless object, so what if it was a connate cardinal treasure? Could it be that they could really trap him to death here? Thus, Chen-shi immediately abandoned all distracting thoughts and tried to establish a connection with his physical body. Perhaps it was his efforts that had worked. Not long after that, the physical body that he had left on the outskirts of Saturn sat down in mid-air with its legs crossed as if it were an electrified robot. At the same time, it began to inject its own energy into the soul mirror. The spirit mirror was not Chen-shi's magic treasure, and it didn't have an instruction manual. Therefore, he could only rely on his experience to determine that activating the spirit mirror required a huge amount of true core. Chen-shi originally planned to activate the spirit mirror to release the imprisoned Xian-yin souls. With him watching over the Xian-yin souls, no accidents would happen after the spirit mirror released the Xian-yin souls. However, Chen-shi never thought that, as he continued to inject true core into the spirit mirror, an extremely powerful energy fluctuation suddenly erupted from the spirit mirror. Then, under the influence of this unknown energy, the huge Saturn began to rotate in the opposite direction along the planet's orbit. Chapter 445. The so-called revolution was the circular movement of the 8 planets around the Sun. Every time the Earth revolved around the Sun, it meant that another year had passed. The 8 planets of the solar system were born from the accretion disk of the same star, so they all revolved in the same direction, from west to east around the Sun. The length of each planet's orbit was different, so it naturally took them different amounts of time to complete one revolution. Using Earth's time as an example, Mercury took 68 days to complete one revolution, Saturn took 29 years to complete one revolution, and Pluto, which was the furthest from the Sun, took as long as 248 years to complete one revolution. It was precisely because of this that it was very difficult for the 8 planets to appear in the same straight line at the same time. Once it did, it would become a legendary phenomenon, 9 stars aligned. Ever since the birth of human civilization, there had never been a true 9 stars aligned. Although there was a 7 stars aligned on May 20, 2000, it was only a convergence of 7 stars. The more planets there were, the more difficult it was for them to converge in a straight line at the same time. This was a geometrical problem. Compared to the age of the planets, human civilization was still far too short. With a mere 6,000 years of civilization, humans hadn't even fully explored the solar system, so how could they dare to dream of exploring the vast universe? On this day, October 21st. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. However, under the influence of the soul mirror, Tiandu unexpectedly descended into the solar system. Of course, this wasn't important. What was important was, after going through untold hardships, Qinshi finally obtained the soul mirror he yearned for day and night. Because of this, he also found In Ying's long-lost soul. However, what he didn't expect was, in the instant that he activated the soul mirror and attempted to release the Yin spirits within, the soul mirror didn't activate as he had imagined. Instead, it suddenly erupted with an extremely powerful and unknown force. This force was so strong that it even pushed Saturn, which was revolving in its orbit, to rotate in the opposite direction. Qinshi sensed that something was amiss in the outside world. Just as he was feeling a little puzzled, an extremely powerful tremor also appeared within the soul mirror. It was like a bottle of water being violently shaken in someone's hand, and the thousands of Yin spirits within the bottle were instantly sent flying in all directions. Qinshi hastily protected Qin Ruoying's divine soul. However, immediately thereafter, his soul was instantly dragged out of the soul mirror by a burst of invisible power, as if it were a small boat caught in a whirlpool. After his soul returned to his body, Qinshi suddenly opened his eyes. He lowered his head and saw that the soul mirror was still in his hands. However, the previously dull surface of the mirror now faintly rippled with circles of ripples. Seeing this, Qinshi was shocked and quickly withdrew his true essence. He withdrew his true essence. But unfortunately, however, the soul mirror continued to operate. At this moment, Qinshi suddenly realized, in addition to Saturn, even Jupiter, Mars, Neptune, and Uranus began to rotate in the opposite direction under the influence of this unknown force. Among them, Venus and Mercury, which were closer to the Sun, suddenly accelerated their revolutions and converged with the Earth in a straight line. With the exception of Earth, the 8 planets all changed their respective orbital speeds and directions, converging into a straight line at a speed visible to the naked eye. In an instant. The alignment of 9 stars, a sudden phenomenon. After 10,000 years, this peerless formation set up by the Taiqing divine ancestor was finally revealed to the world in its entirety. Even the great formation of sun, moon, and stars in the great world was actually only one of its subformations. The moment the alignment of 9 stars occurred, a large nomological net formed by the laws of heaven and earth vaguely appeared at the boundary of the solar system. This was something that had to be mentioned, the boundary of the solar system, which was the place where the sun's gravity could cover. There were as many as 100 billion comets there. These comets were gathered together by the sun's gravity, thus forming a spherical cloud, which was also known as the Oort cloud by scientists. If one were to look at it in another way, the Oort cloud could be seen as the atmosphere, and the comets within it could be seen as droplets of water vapor in the atmosphere. The moment the nomological net appeared, Qinshi was completely stunned. This large net was somewhat similar to the inescapable net in the great world, but it contained nomological attributes that Qinshi could not understand at all. One had to know that Qinshi had already stepped into the insightful void realm. However, when he saw this scene, he still felt a sense of loss and helplessness in his heart. It was like a primary school student trying to solve a calculus problem in university mathematics. The moment he saw those densely packed numbers and symbols, Qinshi was completely stunned. These were all left behind by the Taiqing divine ancestor. The solar system was not like the great world. The area of 120,000 floating islands added together was at most equivalent to the area of Asia. But what about the solar system? Even if one flew at the speed of light, it would take an entire year to fly to the boundary of the solar system. And this was only the radius of the solar system. The more you know, the more you can recognize your own insignificance. To the current Qinshi, this sentence had become the supreme truth. At that moment, Qinshi even began to suspect, had he returned to Earth from heavenly spiral? Before he had reached the insightful void realm, he naturally could not see the nomological imprints at the boundary of the solar system. And it was precisely because he could not see these nomological imprints that he, who was only at the soul formation stage, could fly into the solar system without any hindrance and then return to Earth without any hindrance. Now that he thought about it, Qinshi's heart was suddenly filled with a creepy feeling. It was too terrifying. He did not even know how he came back. He had originally thought that he would be able to roam the universe freely after reaching the soul formation stage. Who would have thought, even in the periphery of a mere solar system, there was such a shocking net of laws? If it were not for someone secretly opening the way for him, how could he, who was only at the soul formation stage, so easily pass through this net of nomological laws? Everyone would more or less suffer from paranoia, and Shi was no exception. So, he was afraid. Although he did not know the true use of this net of nomological laws, Shi could still sense the supreme power contained in it as long as he used his heart to feel it. This was an absolute power that was above the insightful void stage and even the Tao integration stage. Perhaps only true immortals who had experienced the great tribulation of heaven and earth could control it. With this in mind, Shi felt as if the soul mirror in his hand was a hot potato that he could not throw away even if he wanted to, and it was very hot in his hand, but if he continued to use the soul mirror, Shi would not dare to do so even if he had 100 guts. After all, Ying's soul was still inside. Who knew how many secrets were hidden in this broken mirror? What if he caused some kind of trouble? What should he do then? Shi was stunned as he looked at the spectacular 9-star alignment in front of him. Chapter 446. With scruples in their hearts, they were no longer fearless. Most young people looked down on those mediocre middle-aged people. Little did they know that these middle-aged people were just like them back then, fearless in life and fearless in death. Shi's fear did not originate from his heart, but from the outside world. This was because he had already become a middle-aged man from a young age. He had a lover, a child, and a family of his own. He was the sky of this family, the umbrella of this family, and the pillar of this family. So, shouldn't he be afraid? If it was in the past, Shi would definitely continue to study the soul mirror. He would even try to erase the mark left behind by the grand pure divine ancestor and turn it into his natal magic treasure. But now, such thoughts did not appear in his mind at all. After all, Shi was already old. Back to the spectacular 9-star alignment, which could be called a space wonder. Under the push of the soul mirror, the 9 planets quickly converged into a straight line. From afar, it looked like a cannon was in place and ready to fire at any time. The 9-star alignment lasted for about 2 minutes. During these 2 minutes, Shi's mood was as tense as a string. He was afraid that the 9-star alignment would affect Earth, so he raised his essence, energy, and spirit to the highest point early on. If anything strange happened next, Shi would rush back to Earth immediately and take away Nian, Ying, and everyone else he cared about. He might not be able to stop the 9-star alignment, but it would not be easy to hurt his family in front of him. Shi had already prepared for the worst, but he did not expect. What happened next was completely different from what he had imagined. The 9-star alignment did not have any destructive impact on the solar system. The only thing that was affected was the large net of laws entrenched in the periphery of the solar system. He saw, the moment the 9 stars gathered, the large net that contained the unknown power of laws began to flicker faintly. If the 9-star alignment was a key, then the large net of laws was a door. All he needed to do was insert the key into the keyhole and twist it gently. This huge net of laws that had shrouded the solar system for over 10,000 years slowly loosened. The stars moved, and all living things were in the universe. The 9 stars returned to their positions, and the laws disappeared. After the invisible power from the soul mirror disappeared, the 8 planets and the degraded Pluto began to revolve in their original orbits. This rare spectacle of the 9 stars' alignment was like an unreachable mirage. Apart from making Shi worry for a while, it didn't leave anything else behind. After a flash of white light, the soul mirror reverted back to its previous dull and lifeless state. At this moment, the large net of laws that made even Shi's heart palpitate completely vanished. Shi frowned as he looked at the distant Oat Nebula. That was the boundary of the solar system, and also the boundary between the solar system and the universe. He vaguely felt that he had accidentally triggered some sort of mechanism, so he could not help but want to go to the Oat Nebula to check it out. But after thinking about it, in the end, Chen-shi suppressed the throbbing in his heart and flew towards Saturn's ring with the soul mirror in hand. The people from Celestial Capital were still unconscious. Once they woke up, these people would inevitably yearn for their former home, which would bring a huge impact to Earth. Chen-shi did not want any external forces to interfere with the self-development of Earth's civilization, so he set up a large formation on Saturn's ring and imprisoned all the refugees from Celestial Capital in the formation. This was only a temporary measure. Ying had not woken up yet, and Nian was still waiting for him at home, so why would Chen-shi waste too much time dealing with the refugees from Celestial Capital? It would not be too late to come back and clean up the mess in Celestial Capital after he dealt with the problems at home. Therefore, after hurriedly setting up the formation, Chen-shi headed straight for Earth without looking back. Nian, I'm back. Chen-shi did not know that at the same time he set off to return to Earth, outside the distant Oat Nebula. A wooden boat was rushing into the Oat Nebula at an extremely fast speed. The Oat Nebula was made up of trillions of comets. Compared to it, the small wooden boat suddenly looked extremely small, like a microorganism under a microscope. Two teenagers of 15 or 16 years old sat on the boat. One of them sat at the bow, holding a magic weapon that looked like an oar in his hand. Every time the teenager waved the oar, the wooden boat would suddenly rush forward tens of thousands of miles in an extremely strange way. Chung Hua. What are you doing? The teenager sitting at the stern was busy cultivating, so he did not pay attention to the direction the wooden boat was heading. At this moment, he looked up and found that the surroundings were full of comets of different sizes. He was so scared that his face turned pale. He quickly grabbed the corner of the teenager's clothes and shouted, "This is the Tianshu ruins. Do you want to die? Turn around. Turn around. I don't want to die here with you." Hearing this, the teenager called Chung Hua seemed to have gone crazy. He did not care about his companion's dissuasion. Instead, he waved the oar in his hand wildly, so that the speed of the wooden boat instantly increased by 30%. Seeing this, the teenager sitting at the stern was not willing to wait for death. He immediately raised his hands and directly launched an attack at the teenager who was driving the boat. The boat of friendship really capsized so easily. Chung Hua seemed to have expected this. Seeing that his companion was attacking him, he did not panic at all. He directly used the oar as a weapon and fought back. The two of them were about the same age, so their cultivation was naturally similar. Therefore, while Chung Hua was dealing with his companion's attack, he still had time to laugh and said, "Fei, didn't you always say that the universe is so big that although you can't see it all in your life, you have to set foot in 2 or 3 places? The Tianshu ruins are right in front of you. Don't you want to go in and have a look?" Hearing this, the teenager called Fei's face turned cold. He said hatefully, "The Tianshu ruins is known as an ancient forbidden area. Anyone who trespasses will die. Do you really think that these legends are only used to fool 3-year-old children? Ha 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 ha. Are you afraid? Of course I'm not afraid of you." The teenager was arrogant to begin with. How could he endure such ridicule from his companion? Therefore, Fei no longer showed mercy. He directly drew his long sword and fought with Chung Hua. The two of them fought back and forth, but they did not notice at all. The wooden boat had already gone deep into the Oat Nebula. When the wooden boat rushed out of the Oat Nebula, the two of them suddenly felt that their eyes were wide open, so they could not help but stop what they were doing. This is the Tianshu ruins? We're actually here? The two teenagers stared blankly at the solar system in front of them. Even the daring Chung Hua was shocked at this moment. The reason why Chung Hua dared to drive the wooden boat close to the Oat Nebula was because he knew the power of this cloud-piercing shuttle. One had to know that this cloud-piercing shuttle was his father's most important treasure. It was personally made by a supreme being, and its speed was extremely fast. When the host was in danger, the cloud-piercing shuttle could even instantly turn into a defensive treasure to protect the host. This was also the reason why Chung Hua dared to go close to the Oat Nebula. He just wanted to scare Fei. Who would have thought that the two of them would actually break into the legendary forbidden area without any hindrance, the Tianshu ruins? Chapter 447. Generosity should be rewarded, and arrogance should stop the youthful heart. According to Earth's standards, Chunghua and Ifei were still underage. However, relying on their extraordinary cultivation base, these two brats, who were still wet behind the ears, were actually more courageous than most people. They didn't understand how they could enter the Tianshu ruins so easily. However, after confirming that it really happened, even the cautious Ifei didn't complain about going back. Instead, he became excited. The boat of friendship started moving again. The two youths squeezed at the front of the boat and watched the cloud-piercing shuttle enter the solar system at an extremely fast speed. There was no fear of the unknown in their eyes, only a strong yearning for the ancient legends. Chonghua, it's better to be careful. Rumor has it that the Tianshu ruins are the cultivation grounds of the ancient Almighty. Although there may be great opportunities hidden inside, there are also hidden dangers. Our cultivation levels are still low. Without this cloud-piercing shuttle, we wouldn't even be able to roam the stars freely. If there's some kind of formation on this planet, we'll probably die here today. As he spoke, Ifei pointed at Pluto, which was not far away. Pluto was only 1/3 the size of the moon. From afar, it didn't give off any sense of visual oppression. Dwarf planets like Pluto were extremely common in the universe. However, Pluto was inside the Tianshu ruins. Therefore, even though the two of them had roamed the stars since they were young and were used to all kinds of dangers in the universe, they didn't dare to approach it at all. Therefore, the two of them drove the wooden boat around Pluto, and after making sure that there was nothing worth exploring, they quickly sailed to the next planet. In reality, the solar system was like an egg. The sun was the yolk, the space where the 8 planets were was the egg white, and the outermost Oat Nebula, which was covered with trillions of comets, was the eggshell. The dense comets floated around the solar system, so the situation inside the solar system couldn't be seen from the outside. And this was in the eyes of outsiders, Tianshu ruins. For the immortal cultivators in the outside world, the Tianshu ruins were like a dried-up treasure trove. According to ancient records, before the Tianshu ruins were sealed, it was once a holy land for cultivation. Even the glorious jade-clear grotto heaven was once only one of the inheritances in the Tianshu ruins. Of course, the Tianshu ruins back then was not called the Tianshu ruins. Instead, it was called Tianshu realm. Later, for some reason, the Tianshu realm, which was at its peak, suddenly declined. Then, an ancient almighty set up a heaven and earth formation, completely isolating this galaxy from the outside world. Under the protection of the formation, no one could approach the Oat Nebula. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of years had passed. Everything about the Tianshu ruins gradually faded from people's minds as time passed. It wasn't until a few years ago that a brilliant genius appeared in the jade-clear grotto heaven that the Tianshu ruins returned to the public sight. This genius had cultivated for less than 1,000 years, but his cultivation had already stepped into the ranks of Empyrean. Because of this, he was known as the #1 cultivator below the Supreme Realm. He even had hopes of becoming the next Supreme Headmaster of the Jade-Clear Grotto. But it was a pity, however, this young, celestial lord was crazy for some unknown reason. He actually wanted to use the method of exploring the Tianshu ruins to make his name resound throughout the Supreme Palace enclosure. Yuan, read, Yuan, as in broken and ruined walls. Luoyang was known as the ancient capital of 13 dynasties, but after 2,000 years, it had become a third-tier city. The Tianshu ruins had been quiet for more than 2,000 years. Tens of thousands of years had passed. The immortal cultivators in the Supreme Palace enclosure had long forgotten its former glory. This Tianshu realm master wanted to use the Tianshu ruins as a stepping stone, but he never expected, in front of the sun, moon, and stars formation, he was like a moth to a flame. He did not even cause a spark before he turned into a wisp of smoke and disappeared from the world. This was also the reason why no one dared to approach the Oat Nebula. The young man did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. He was not afraid of the slightest thing. Thus, the two daring brats piloted the cloud-piercing shuttle and hurried in the direction of Earth, back to Qinshi. After imprisoning the people of Tiandu in Saturn's ring, he rushed back to Earth. Shangjing City, which he had not seen in a long time. The courtyard, which he had not seen in a long time. It was late autumn. The old locust tree in the courtyard had already shed its leaves. The withered leaves were piled up on the bluestone floor. When the autumn wind blew, a few leaves drifted out of the courtyard. It was not the courtyard that was deserted, but the people's hearts. Qin did not like this feeling. Thus, he frowned and looked around the courtyard. After confirming that his restrictions were not damaged, he immediately waved his hand and used his supreme cultivation to forcefully reverse the flowering of the plants in the courtyard. In an instant, it was as if spring had returned to the earth. Hundreds of flowers bloomed. Even the old locust tree in the courtyard suddenly grew lush green leaves. Accompanied by the overflowing fragrance of the flowers, Qin strode toward the west wing. It was now 4:00 in the afternoon in Shangjing. Nian was not at home. Qin Yongyan and the big cat should be waiting for her at the school gate. Thus, in the huge courtyard, there was only a fish that could only roll its eyes all day long. Qin pushed open the door. Qin Ruoying's figure came into view. A year was enough time for the brand new quilt to be dyed a little dark yellow. However, it did not leave any trace on Qin Ruoying's face. She lay quietly on the bed as if she was asleep. Qin came to the bedside. After smoothing out her hair that was messed up by Nian, he gently held his lover's hand. "Ying, I'm back, I'm sorry, I've kept you waiting." As she spoke, Qin took out that damned broken mirror from her bosom. This was the first time he looked at a magic treasure so carefully. It was as if he was not looking at himself in the mirror, but Qin Ruoying in the mirror. This was a connate treasure. Not only did it involve the soul of Xian Nu, but it also involved the great formation of sun and moon and stars. Thus, Qin did not dare to activate it lightly. He had found the soul mirror. Ying had not woken up yet. So, what was he waiting for? Qin hesitated for a long time. Then, as if he had finally come to a decision, he gently kissed his lover's forehead. Then, he silently sat cross-legged next to Qin Ruoying. He prepared to let his soul enter the soul mirror again. Then, like last time, he would imbue the soul mirror with vital essence in order to activate it. This time, whether it was the explosion of the sky or the 9-star alignment, he must bring Ying's soul out. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Website. Chapter 448. Qin hesitated for a long time before he finally came to a decision. He planted a gentle kiss on his lover's forehead before he sat down next to Qin Ruoying with his legs crossed. He was prepared to let his soul enter the spirit mirror again and infuse his inner energy into it to activate it just like last time. This time, whether it was the explosion of the heavenly capital or the 9-star alignment, he had to bring Ying's soul out. It was fine when she didn't go home, but when she got home and saw that her lover was still lying quietly in bed, Qin's heart suddenly felt very uncomfortable. He was very upset because he had failed to protect Qin Ruoying. After all, for a cultivator who had reached the Dongshu stage, what was the point of cultivating if he couldn't even protect the woman he loved? Even if I lived forever, I would be nothing more than a soulless zombie without you by my side. Therefore, Qin was like a tortoise eating a scalpel this time. He was determined to rescue Qin Ruoying's soul. Even though he knew that activating the spirit mirror might lead to some unexpected things, he was not willing to wait any longer. He had waited for a long time. Ying had also waited for a long time. He couldn't live without his lover, and Nian couldn't live without her mother. This family couldn't live without a mistress. Therefore, after Qin made his decision, he immediately infused his inner energy into the spirit mirror without hesitation. When he gave it his all, his inner energy was as vast and mighty as the Yangtze River, or as endless as the surging Yellow River. As the incomparably dense inner energy flowed into the spirit mirror, a strange white light suddenly lit up on the surface of the spirit mirror. Seeing this, Qin immediately held his breath and entered the white light again using the method of astral projection. It was still the same strange space of consciousness. However, after Chen-Shi entered, he suddenly realized that there were many subtle changes in this place. There were even some colors. One had to know that the space of consciousness was like a universe that had yet to be developed. Consciousness was an inexplicable thing. There was no concept of dimensions here, so the five senses were naturally useless. Everything could only be felt by the heart. As a result, everything he saw, heard, and even touched here. In fact, it was just a manifestation of one's inner consciousness. Therefore, theoretically speaking, there would not be any changes in the space of consciousness, because it did not have a proper form to begin with. But the strange thing was, this time, however, Chen-Shi's feelings were completely different from last time. In his perception, this originally chaotic space of consciousness seemed to have been split open by Pangu's giant axe at this moment. There was a sky here, and suddenly there was a land. There was a dim yellow aurora in the sky and a dark green Styx river on the ground. Chen-Shi was now standing in the middle of the river Styx. The river was not deep, barely reaching his knees. Chen-Shi was a little surprised by the changes here. After carefully sensing for a while, he suddenly realized that the souls that had previously filled the entire space of consciousness had now all turned into fish in the river Styx, and were constantly rushing forward with the river Styx. Seeing this, Chen-Shi could not help but frown as he walked forward along the river Styx. He did not know how long he had walked. Only then did he finally find that familiar fluctuation of divine soul again. It was still that weak fluorescent light. Yingying's soul was there. Chen-Shi immediately ran toward the fluorescent light. However, as he got closer and closer to the fluorescent light, Chen-Shi's mood became more and more serious. Because, he suddenly realized, the fluorescent light was at the end of the river Styx. Thousands of souls were following the river Styx and pouring into the fluorescent light. After realizing that something was wrong, Chen-Shi's heart could not help but skip a beat. He thought that something had happened here. Therefore, he did not even have time to think. He immediately used his soul to wrap around the fluorescent light and tried to bring it out of the soul mirror. However, the strange thing was, this fluorescent light seemed to have taken root in the space of consciousness. No matter how Chen-Shi tried, the fluorescent light floated there quietly and did not move at all. After all, Chen-Shi was now an immortal cultivator at the Dongshu stage. Even if he had left his physical body, his soul should still be extremely powerful. However, no matter how hard he tried, the fluorescent light did not move at all. After a few fruitless attempts, Chen-Shi was instantly enraged. After hearing a wild roar, an extremely strong golden light suddenly erupted from his body. Then, this golden light was like the sun rising from the east, instantly illuminating half of the space of consciousness and completely enveloping the fluorescent light. At the same time, Chen-Shi's reckless behavior seemed to have affected the river Styx below. As a result, the river Styx suddenly dried up. Countless souls were like startled birds, instantly turning into soul bodies and flying out in all directions. The chaos had not even split, but it was already so severely injured. How powerful was Chen-Shi's soul? What had entered the soul mirror before was only a wisp of it. But now, Chen-Shi wanted to completely separate his soul from his physical body and pour it all into the soul mirror. He wanted to use his soul to build a soul bridge that connected Qin Ruoying to the outside world and use it to forcibly bring her out of the soul mirror. Fortunately, the soul mirror was now an ownerless object. Otherwise, Chen-Shi's violent and barbaric actions would definitely cause the soul mirror to suffer a backlash, and his soul would definitely be severely injured as a result. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Chen-Shi did not care so much now. In any case, he had to take Yingying's soul away today. Thus, under his continuous efforts, the fluorescent light was forcibly pulled out from the end of the river Styx. That's right, it was pulled out. This fluorescent light was like a plant, and it had taken root at the end of the river Styx. After Chen-Shi plucked the streak of light out of the ground with brute force, a burst of intense vibrations erupted from within the soul mirror again. It was the same as before. Tens of thousands of Yin souls were shaken and scattered in all directions. Chen Shi's soul was like a small boat that had encountered a whirlpool. Suddenly, it was pulled by an invisible force, as if it was trying to drive him out of the soul mirror. But this time, Chen Shi was fully prepared. Thus, the moment the invisible force appeared, he had already used his soul to wrap the fluorescent light up in layers. Then, like a smuggler who had successfully avoided the security check, Chen Shi successfully brought the fluorescent light back to the real world. Chen Shi succeeded. But he did not know that the moment he left the soul mirror with the fluorescent light, the river Styx surged out again. Tens of thousands of Een souls turned into fish and gathered in the river Styx once again. And at the end of the river Styx, suddenly, a ray of fluorescent light appeared. Please remember the domain name of this book.com, website of the wonderful book.com. Chapter 449. Note, I made a mistake when I pasted the previous chapter. If you didn't see my note at the end of the chapter, then it's the wrong chapter. Sorry. The so-called husband and wife were actually, although they didn't have the colorful phoenix wings, their hearts were as one. Therefore, the moment Qin Ruoying opened her eyes, Chen Shi suddenly realized that there might be a problem. As expected. After Qin Ruoying opened her eyes and saw him, she didn't get up and hug him immediately. Instead, she looked at him up and down with a strange and cold look. Seeing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but frown slightly. At the same time, he stretched out his right hand to see her situation. But what Chen Shi didn't expect was that, just as he reached out his hand, Qin Ruoying suddenly leaped up like a carp. Following that, she smoothly executed a set of wrist and arm lock martial arts. Looking at this posture, Ying seemed to want to take him down in one fell swoop. This set of self-defense kung fu was passed down in the Qin family. Although Qin Ruoying hadn't come into contact with kung fu before, she still stepped into the celestial being stage with the help of Chen Shi. It should be known that celestial beings were no longer in the ranks of ordinary people. It was just a few moves of wrist-locking kung fu. She only needed to take a look at it to master it. Qin Ruoying had always disliked fighting with people. If it wasn't for the fact that cultivation could increase her lifespan, and thus she could stay with Chen Shi forever, she was afraid that she wouldn't be willing to spend too much time on the road of cultivation. But now, Qin Ruoying, on the other hand, acted as if she had been possessed by Qin Wanqing. The moment she came up, she started fighting without a single word. Chen Shi was afraid of hurting her, so he immediately dispersed all the strength in his body. As a result, Qin Ruoying suddenly pressed him down on the bed by his arm. A dignified Dongshu stage cultivator was actually pressed down on the bed by a celestial being at this moment. If this matter were to spread, it would only shock people on the spot. Chen Shi didn't dare to move at all, but Qin Ruoying didn't show any mercy. After pressing Chen Shi down, Qin Ruoying turned over and mounted the horse directly on his back, and pressed him firmly on the bed. At this moment, Qin Ruoying seemed to not know Chen Shi at all. After pressing his neck from behind, she asked coldly, "Who are you?" Hearing this, Chen Shi could only tilt his head and ask in a muffled voice, "Ying, you don't even recognize me?" "I don't know you." After saying that, Qin Ruoying raised her head and looked around. The room was still the same room. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know she was, but she couldn't remember anything. She's teach she, remember anything. Amnesia? Maybe. From the moment Qin Ruoying woke up to the moment she captured Chen Shi, the entire process seemed to have happened in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Chen Shi could roughly guess the reason. Normal people might think that this was amnesia. But in reality, this was a sign of a missing soul. It was probably because he forcibly took her soul out of the spirit mirror, so the soul he took out was incomplete, and Qin Ruoying lost her memories. After figuring out the crux of the matter, Chen Shi's originally tense mood immediately relaxed. It wasn't a big problem, it was just that her soul was missing. At worst, he could go to the spirit mirror later, and the problem would be solved. However, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards him made Chen Shi, who was used to Ying's gentleness and consideration, suddenly feel like he was enjoying himself. In this world, other than Ying, which woman could ride on his back? Nian was still young, so she couldn't be considered a woman. Qin Ruoying rode on Chen Shi's back, and her two legs were straddling Chen Shi's waist. Therefore, the roots of her thighs were tightly pressed against Chen Shi's waist, and he was firmly sandwiched between them. Although she used a lot of strength, this strength was not even enough to tickle Chen Shi. Therefore, Chen Shi was not in a hurry to struggle. Instead, he lay on the bed and silently felt the softness coming from Ying's thighs. TSK, this feeling, it was really bouncy, full, and alluring. He was used to eating a lady from a noble family who was as gentle as water. Suddenly, she was replaced with an ice beauty who was as cold as ice. The taste was simply wonderful. If Qin Ruoying knew what he was thinking, she would probably raise her hand and slap him across the face. Men are all pigs. Chen Shi was like a dead fish, lying on the bed and not moving at all. At this moment, Qin Ruoying seemed to have realized that her posture was a little indecent, so she immediately jumped up from his body and went straight to the door of the west wing. Chen Shi was busy savoring the feeling, and when Qin Ruoying left, it instantly made him feel a sense of emptiness, so he hurriedly got up and chased after her. Ying, don't run around, where are you going? Seeing that Chen Shi was chasing after her, Qin Ruoying turned her head and glared fiercely at him. Chen Shi had no choice but to hurriedly take a few steps back, and then put on an old face, indicating that he would not go near her. After that, Qin Ruoying then turned and walked out of the west wing. When she walked out of the house and saw the beautiful scenery of hundreds of flowers in full bloom, Qin Ruoying could not help but smile. Ying had always liked flowers and trees, so the courtyard had long been filled with potted plants by Chen Shi. When Chen Shi returned home, he had conveniently changed the flowering period of the plants in the courtyard, but he did not expect that it would come in handy at this moment. Even if Qin Ruoying lost her memory, this hobby did not seem to have changed. Thus, she quietly stood in front of a lily and carefully savored the faint fragrance coming from it. Until this moment, Chen Shi felt as if he had seen the lover that he was so familiar with. Ying was still Ying. She had not changed. And he had not changed either. Qin Ruoying minded her own business in the courtyard, admiring the flowers by herself. Chen Shi obediently waited by the side, feeding the fish in the fish tank from time to time. The two seemed to be strangers, but in fact, there was a faint bond between the two. Just like a young couple quarreling on the street, the girl walked quickly in front, and the guy followed far behind her. Even if the passers-by did not know them, they would immediately realize, the two of them should be a couple. They seemed to ignore each other, but in fact, they had been ruthlessly abusing the single people on the street. Yes, this was the feeling. The strange ambiguous atmosphere did not last long. When Chen Shi noticed that someone had walked into Dongming Alley, a faint smile suddenly appeared on his face. Calculating the time, Nian should be home from school. I wonder, the moment she saw her parents, what kind of expression would she have on her face? Anyway, no matter what expression she had, that little face would definitely be very cute, right? Chapter 450. In the golden autumn of October, the smell of osmanthus wafted through the air. Whenever it was the middle of October, there would always be a sudden gust of wind in Shangjing. It seemed to indicate that the weather was about to turn cold and that everyone should wear more clothes. The bus stop sign was not at the entrance of Dongming Alley, but at a crossroad 300 meters away from the alley. After the little girl got off the bus, she immediately felt a burst of cold air rush up her back, so she couldn't help but hug her school uniform tightly. Looking at her pitiful appearance, Qin Yongyan smiled as he picked up the little fellow from the ground. Using his own inner strength, he chased away the chill in her body before quickly bringing her to the entrance of the alley. Every day, they would get on and off the bus here on time. Of course, the difference between the little girl and the other children was that in addition to being picked up by her grandfather, she was always accompanied by a study companion and pet, the big cat. When they got home, Qin Yongyan would personally cook for the little girl, and the little girl would obediently return to the west wing. She would either play with the big cat for a while, or watch TV for a while waiting for dinner. This was the daily routine of the grandfather and grandson pair. Usually, at this time, the big cat would quickly jump off the bus roof, and then slowly walk behind the grandfather and grandson pair. Similar scenes kept repeating. But, the big cat's behavior today was a bit strange. As soon as it returned to the entrance of the alley, it seemed to have discovered something. After lying on the ground and sniffing a few times, it was like a dog, with its tail between its legs, it jumped up the wall and onto the roof. Even Qin Yongyan didn't have time to react before the big cat's figure completely disappeared from the top of the wall. Meow. Then, the big cat started to cry from the other side of the wall. But, as soon as its voice sounded, it was as if something was stuck in its neck, and it suddenly stopped. Qin Yongyan felt that something was wrong. After more than a year of living together, he and the big cat were very familiar with each other, so even if the big cat only cried out softly, Qin Yongyan could roughly distinguish its thoughts based on the pitch of its voice. The big cat's cry was so strange that Qin Yongyan couldn't tell what it meant. Considering that the big cat was different from other animals, once it barked, something must have happened. Therefore, Qin Yongyan quickly carried the little fellow back to the courtyard. Wow! Grandfather! Have the flowers bloomed? It smells so good. As soon as the door was pushed open, a refreshing fragrance of flowers rushed to the tip of the little fellow's nose. Thus, she hurriedly gestured for Qin Yongyan to put her down and ran towards the Chuehua gate. It was still the circular drooping flower gate. The little fellow would walk back and forth through this door several times a day. But this time, when she came to the door again, the scene behind the door became a scene that she would never forget for the rest of her life. He saw, inside this door, Qin was standing quietly in the middle of the courtyard, looking at her with a smile. Qin Ruoying stood in front of the potted plant in the corner of the courtyard. Although she pretended to admire the flowers as if nothing had happened, her eyes couldn't help but drift to the door of the Chuehua gate. That courtyard, that door. That flower, that person. The little fellow stood outside the door and was stunned for about 5 seconds. She didn't say anything and just looked at her with a smile. He watched as the expression on her face changed from dazed to surprised, and finally into a kind of crazy ecstasy. Daddy, daddy. Daddy, daddy, daddy. She opened her small hands and ran towards Qin like a spoiled child. At this time, Qin threw the big cat aside, then quickly stepped forward and hugged her tightly in his arms. The best gift was a hug after a long separation. This kind of hug didn't just come from love. It could also come from family. Daddy, I missed you so much. I missed you so much. Qin squatted on the ground, the little fellow buried her head deep in his shoulder, and then started to act spoiled to him in a muffled voice. Qin hugged her small body, and his palm unconsciously rubbed her back gently. After not seeing her for a long time, Nyan had grown taller again. With just a casual glance, Qin knew the exact height of the little fellow. 125, 11 cm. This height was considered above average among children of the same age. According to this trend, Nyan should be like her mother in the future, with a pair of straight and slender legs. Yes, definitely at the level of a supermodel. Although Qin had been away for more than a year, the little fellow didn't look like him at all. Instead, she was more clingy to him than before. The father and daughter were lovey-dovey for a long time. The little fellow refused to let go for a long time, as if she was afraid that if she let go, Qin would leave again. When the little fellow was tired of being lovey-dovey in Qin's arms, her eyes naturally drifted to Qin Ruoying. Mommy. You're awake? As she spoke, the little fellow pushed Qin away, as if she wanted to run to Qin Ruoying. But at this time, Qin suddenly pulled her back. Nyan, wait a minute, Mommy has just recovered, and now there are still some sequelae. She can't even recognize Daddy, just like an injured small animal. If we get too close, we may scare her, and then her old illness will relapse, so you'd better not go over now. Let's give her some space and let her be alone. When Mommy's illness is fully recovered, we'll go out to play as a family, okay? After hearing that Daddy did not allow her to get close to Mommy, the little fellow's mouth immediately pouted. She was still very obedient, so she immediately retracted the leg that she had stepped out. But, although she retracted her leg, her little eyes were still fixed on Qin Ruoying. That pair of big watery eyes stared at Qin Ruoying, and Qin Ruoying could not help but frown. The reason why she did not leave immediately was that everything in the courtyard gave her a familiar feeling, and she had no place to go. Even if she had lost her memory, Qin Ruoying still felt that the little girl in front of her was very familiar. This feeling was even more familiar than the one that Qin Shi gave her. After all, Qin Shi was only her lover. And this little fellow in front of her was a piece of flesh that had fallen from her body. Therefore, Qin Ruoying just frowned and looked at the little fellow. She stood still on the spot. The little fellow remembered Daddy's teachings, and even if she wanted to go forward, she did not dare to. This strange atmosphere lasted for a few seconds. When Qin Shi realized that something was wrong, his mind suddenly throbbed, so he softly whispered in the little fellow's ear, "Nian Nian, why don't you go and try? Mommy doesn't know me, but maybe she knows you. Don't worry, if Mommy does anything strange, Daddy will pull you back immediately, just like going to the zoo to see an orangutan." Qin Shi carefully reminded the little fellow of the rules of entering the garden. However, he forgot the most important point, and that was, Qin Ruoying was already a celestial being. Therefore, if he did not use telepathy, every word that he said to the little fellow would be transmitted to Qin Ruoying's ears. As a result, Qin Ruoying silently watched the father and daughter's performance as if she was looking at an idiot. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com, Wonderful Book Mobile Version Website. .com. Chapter 451. The reunion was unexpected. I hope you've been well since we last met. Qin Ruoying heard every word of the conversation between the father and daughter. Although she had lost her memory, it didn't mean that she had lost her mind. So she was very clear about what this conversation meant. In fact, since she woke up, Qin Ruoying had been seriously thinking about everything that had happened in front of her. The reason why she was able to remain so calm and collected was simply because that was her personality to begin with. At this time, although Qin Ruoying didn't wear a sign on her face at all times like Qin Wanqing with the words, "Keep away," clearly written on it, she still gave people a feeling that it was difficult to approach her. After losing the emotional bond between her and Qin Shi, she finally showed her true self. After all, a woman couldn't just be gentle to strangers, right? This was the Qin Ruoying that Qin Shi knew at the beginning. She was a real goddess. So, she could only be admired from afar and couldn't be touched. Qin Shi didn't dare to get close to her. At this time, the little girl also found that her mother had become a little different from before. So, even with Qin Shi's encouragement behind her, the little girl still refused to take a step forward. Children were actually very sensitive. When the little girl found that her mother looked at her in a completely different way, it was as if someone had poured a bucket of cold water on her in the middle of winter. She was completely cold. It wasn't that she didn't want to, but she didn't dare. Seeing this, Qin Shi had to whisper a few words of encouragement in the little girl's ear. But after the little girl heard it, she still cowered and refused to go forward. Regarding this, Qin Shi couldn't help but have a headache. But at this time, a surprising scene suddenly appeared. Qin Ruoying, who had been motionless all this time, actually took the initiative to wave to the little girl, as if to ask her to go over. Seeing this, how could the little girl hold back? Almost instantly, she took a step forward and directly pounced on Qin Ruoying. "Mother! Mother! You're finally awake. I miss you so much." As soon as he got close to Qin Ruoying, the little guy suddenly hugged her waist and buried his head in her waist, acting very coquettishly. At that moment, Qin Ruoying's body clearly stiffened. But then, she took the initiative to place her hand on the little fellow's head and gently stroked it. Qin Ruoying didn't know why he was so close to this little girl. After being hugged tightly by her, Qin Ruoying faintly felt a strange yet familiar intimacy. Could it be, am I really her mother? Thinking of this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but turn to look at Qin Shi. At this time, Chen Shi was smiling from the bottom of his heart because of their reunion. It was fine even if he didn't laugh. This smile made Qin Ruoying's face turn cold. She even began to wonder if she had been deceived by this father and daughter pair. This unique reunion quickly came to an end. Except for the little fellow, Qin Ruoying didn't show any face to anyone. One had to know that there were no outsiders in this house. One was her husband, the other was her father. The two most important men in her life could only stand aside at this moment, looking helplessly at her and the little fellow playing in the courtyard. Although the scene of this reunion might be a little different from what they had imagined. But at least their family was reunited. Chen Shi was back, and Qin Ruoying was also awake. This family, it finally felt like home again. Then, the power of cooking returned to Chen Shi's hands. In order to celebrate this reunion, Chen Shi used all his trump cards. Whether it was flying in the sky, running on the ground, or swimming in the water, everything had to be served on the table today. In short, 9 dishes and 1 soup were served, and everything was to be perfect. The little fellow hadn't eaten Chen Shi's dishes in a long time, so when the first dish was served, she pulled Qin Ruoying directly to their seats, and kept yelling for her father to hurry up and serve the dishes. Qin Ruoying didn't stand on ceremony. Although she hadn't acknowledged Chen Shi yet, she didn't feel a trace of repulsion towards this man in front of her. Instead, she felt a faint tug at her heart. She was secretly observing Chen Shi, but she didn't know that her every move had been seen by Chen Shi. Chen Shi was very pleased with himself, but he didn't show it on his face. If it wasn't for the fact that his sister-in-law hadn't woken up yet, and he had to go to the spirit mirror again, Chen Shi even wanted to spend more time with Ying after she lost her memory. Dinner was quite enjoyable. During the meal, Qin Ruoying didn't say a word, so the little fellow naturally became the communication bridge between her parents. Under Chen Shi's instructions, she kept yelling for her mother to eat. That silly little look of hers made Qin Ruoying chuckle. Qin Yongyan had never liked to interfere in his children's affairs. Seeing that Chen Shi had returned safely, he could naturally take off the burden on his shoulders. Therefore, after confirming that Qin Ruoying's amnesia wasn't a big problem, he hastily ate his dinner, and then went back to his room to shut himself in. After dinner, the sky had already darkened. By the time Chen Shi finished cleaning up the table and chairs, the little fellow had already pulled Qin Ruoying back to the west wing to watch cartoons. Chen Shi hesitated for a moment outside the door. Just as he was about to step into the room, Qin Ruoying's cold voice sounded from inside the room. "Get out." Hearing this, Chen Shi could only shake his head and smile bitterly. Well, he didn't even have the right to enter the room now. Chen Shi was really depressed. At this time, the little fellow didn't forget to add, "Dad, you play by yourself. Mom said, you're not allowed to enter the room. I'll sleep with Mom today." Chen Shi had no choice but to turn around and walk into the guest room that Xiao Yuan stayed in before. As early as when Chen Shi left, Xiao Yuan had already successfully entered a multinational company as an intern under Gu Lao's introduction, so the tea house was completely closed. Chen Shi lay on the bed, thinking about how to reopen the tea house tomorrow while listening to the movements in the room next door. Although Qin Ruoying lost her memory, she still had a kind of heartfelt care for Ninian. This also made Chen Shi feel very gratified. Ying was still the same Ying. Although incomplete, she was still the Ying that he couldn't help but be fascinated by. Qin Ruoying seemed to have forgotten how to cultivate, so when the little fellow fell asleep, she silently lay on the side. Chen Shi was on this side of the wall, she was on the other side of the wall. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens God Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 452. It was night. It was a dark and windy night. Without alerting anyone, Chen Shi quietly slipped into the east wing from the guest room. After returning home this time, he actually had a lot of urgent matters to deal with. The first in line was Qin Ruoying, then the second in line was, naturally, it was his sister-in-law. Qin Xueqing was lying quietly in the east wing. The furnishings in the room were almost exactly the same as 2 years ago. Under the protection of Qin Shi's restriction, not to mention thieves, even Wang Chuanjiu could only look at her daughter through the window. Although Qin Shueqing had a bad temper, her heart was still quite soft. She definitely belonged to the type that was tough on the outside but soft on the inside. Therefore, sometimes even Qin Shi would suddenly feel that his sister-in-law was quite cute. Therefore, even without Qin Yongyan saying anything, Qin Shi had already decided that he must wake his sister-in-law up tonight. As a result, as the brother-in-law, tonight, under the eyes of his wife, he sneaked into his sister-in-law's room. After all, Ying was his lover, so Qin Shi didn't need any medium at all. He could directly find Qin Ruoying's soul among the thousands of souls. His sister-in-law didn't have this kind of spiritual bond with him, so Qin Shi needed some kind of medium to find her soul. This medium was naturally Qin Shueqing's physical body. Qin Shueqing was still wearing the white training clothes that she wore before she fainted. After Qin Shi pushed open the door and entered, the first thing that came into his sight were the two towering mountains. His wife was in the opposite room, but as the brother-in-law, he sneaked into his sister-in-law's room in the middle of the night. Although he did it to do a good deed, this kind of feeling was somewhat strange. Moreover, with Qin Shi's cultivation, what difference did it make if his sister-in-law wore clothes in front of him? Of course, Qin Shi was not a lecherous and wretched person, so he immediately withdrew his divine sense, then closed his eyes and came to Qin Shueqing's side. Qin Shi sat down beside his sister-in-law with his legs crossed and placed the soul mirror flat on her forehead before sending his consciousness into it again. As the saying goes, unfamiliar the first time, familiar the second. With the previous 2 experiences under his belt, Qin Shi was already very familiar with the process of entering the soul mirror again. It was still that space of consciousness. But this time, however, the space of consciousness that Qin Shi saw was different from the last time. Instead, it was like before the chaos was formed. The dim aurora and the green nether river were gone. All that was left were thousands of unconscious souls drifting about in the chaos. After Qin Shi arrived, the thousands of Yin souls immediately fled in all directions as if they were avoiding the god of plague. Seeing this, Qin Shi did not have any suspicions. After he poured his inner yuan into Qin Shueqing's body, a glimmer of light appeared between Qin Shueqing's eyebrows. Then, a wisp of Yin soul flew out from the thousands of Yin souls, then went straight to Qin Shi's side and began to circle around his soul. Qin Shi observed carefully, and after confirming that this wisp of Yin's soul had Qin Shueqing's aura, he wrapped it with his own soul and brought it out of the soul mirror. After Qin Shi released this wisp of Yin's soul, it directly disappeared into Qin Shueqing's forehead. Then, Qin Shueqing's eyelids trembled slightly. Seeing this, Qin Shi did not show any joy on his face. Instead, he suddenly frowned. Because he realized that the entire process was unbelievably smooth. It was different from when he was searching for Ying's soul. This time, it felt as if the soul mirror had taken the initiative to return Qin Shueqing's soul to him. How could Qin Shi not find this strange? After all, the soul mirror was a connate treasure. Qin Shi would not be surprised if an artifact spirit was born from it. At this thought, Qin Shi immediately held the soul mirror in his hand and began to seriously think about everything he saw in the soul mirror. Why was it so easy to find his sister-in-law's soul after he spent so much effort to find a part of Ying's soul? Also, what was the situation with the Nether River? Why did Ying's soul appear at the end of the Nether River? Previously, he had been anxious to find Qin Ruoying's soul, so Qin Shi did not pay too much attention to these details. He thought that these images were just projections of his consciousness. Qin Ruoying was very important to him. After this thought was projected into his consciousness, it naturally made sense that Qin Ruoying's soul was at the end of the Nether River. But the problem was, the soul mirror wasn't his magic treasure. How could it be affected by his consciousness and place Ying's soul at the end of the Nether River? Moreover, when he brought out Qin Ruoying's soul, the resistance was so great that Ying lost a part of her soul. So why was it so easy and smooth when he brought out his sister-in-law's soul? The more Qin Shi thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. Abnormal things in the world were strange. This was just too strange. How many more secrets was this broken mirror hiding? At this thought, Qin prepared to let his soul out of his body again and explore the soul mirror. However, right at this moment, Qin suddenly opened her eyes. The soul state was unconscious, so Qin memory was still stuck at the time before she fell into a coma. Therefore, when she opened her eyes and saw Qin sitting by her bed, Qin was stunned. Qin was so focused on the soul mirror that he did not notice that Qin had woken up. Although Qin was almost 30 years old, she was still an unmarried virgin. She had never even held hands with anyone. It was already the middle of the night. How could Qin not be shocked when a man like Qin suddenly appeared by her bed? Brother-in-law sneaked into her room? How was she going to face people in the future? Her sister-in-law had a bad temper. After being provoked, he went berserk on the spot and directly kicked at Qin's waist. This kick, she had used 120% of her strength. After all, Qin had already stepped into the heavenly man stage and was a genuine golden core stage cultivator. At such a close distance, plus the fact that Qin was completely unguarded. Therefore, by the time Qin reacted, her leg had already kicked Qin's waist. Crack. With a muffled sound, her sister-in-law's right leg was immediately fractured. Then, her entire body was thrown away by Qin's protective chi like a rag doll that had been casually thrown away. If Qin had not used his true essence to catch her in time, Qin would have crashed through several walls before falling to the ground. Hey, that, Qin tried to explain, but Qin did not give him a chance to explain. Instead, she pointed at the door and shouted, "Get out! Get out of here!" Okay, don't be agitated, I'll go out now. He had clearly come to do a good deed, but in the end, he was like a thief who had been caught red-handed. In this regard, Qin could only helplessly shake his head and then run out of the east wing like he was escaping. It was bad enough to be misunderstood by his sister-in-law. Who would have thought, as soon as Qin walked out of the east wing, he met Qin Ruoying's cold gaze head-on. How sharp were the eyes and ears of a heavenly man. As soon as Qin made a sound, she had already gotten up to check on the situation. After seeing Qin come out, Qin Ruoying did not say a word. After a bang sound, she closed the door and went back to the room to comfort the little fellow who had just woken up. Qin stood in the courtyard with a helpless expression. He looked left and right at the east wing, then at the west wing, only to feel a chill in his heart. This was great. The yellow mud had really fallen into his crotch. Even if it was not sh*t, it was sh*t. Then, Qin gloomily set up a soundproof restriction in the courtyard. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com, wonderful book mobile version website. .com. Chapter 453. There were 8 immortal arts. Pills, talismans, weapon formations, and witchcraft. They were, pills, talismans, weapon refinement, formations, casting witchcraft, and puppetry. The first 4 were more commonly used. Basically, every orthodox cultivator would gradually learn and master them as they cultivated. The last 4, on the other hand, weren't all that impressive, so only those with crooked paths would focus on them. No one was perfect, including Qin. In online gaming terms, Qin was a top laner who focused on head-on combat. Although he knew a little bit of miscellaneous skills, they were merely summoner skills. When it came to weapon refinement, alchemy, formations, and so on, the support healer was clearly the true professional. Hence, Qin's head hurt. The heaven-bearing efficacious floating mirror was a connate peerless treasure. Qin didn't know much about connate peerless treasures. It was said that only tribulation ascension cultivators who'd undergone the baptism of heavenly tribulations could refine their own personal treasures with the connate true essence in their bodies. Only then could they truly refine a connate peerless treasure. From this, one could see just how rare connate peerless treasures were. It was for this reason that Qin, who'd only been in the soul formation stage, didn't have the right to come into contact with a connate peerless treasure. Of course, even if Shi had obtained a connate peerless treasure by chance, that didn't mean he could use it for himself. The logic was actually quite simple. It was like a poor bastard suddenly obtaining the keys to a Ferrari. He probably wouldn't even know how to start the engine after getting in. There were many types of treasures. Judging from how the soul mirror had been activated a few times, it was most likely a support-type treasure. Support-type treasures were usually refined for specific situations and weren't very practical. Hence, after the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor passed away, the soul mirror had been placed in the Imperial Hall to collect dust. The soul mirror was far beyond what Shi could grasp. Hence, he couldn't find the correct way to activate it after flipping the mirror over and over again for an entire night. Speaking of which, it was strange, after Shi brought out his sister-in-law's soul, the soul mirror suddenly shut down like a phone with no battery. After that, no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to let his spirit enter it again. It was as if the soul mirror had been reduced to an ordinary item, and the space of his consciousness had been completely shut off. He couldn't very well try to break open the soul mirror, could he? Magic treasures needed to be recharged. Soul mirror had created a white hole to engulf a large world, then forcibly reversed the orbits of the 9 planets, thereby expending a lot of energy. Was that why it needed some time to recover? Shi pondered for a long time before coming to such a conclusion. Only then did he feel slightly relieved. Heaven and earth can bear witness. He really didn't want to use this opportunity to spend a few more days with the amnesiac Ying so that he could have a change of taste, the next morning. Following the loud and clear cry of the rooster next door, the little fellow slowly woke up from her sleep. She didn't know what happened last night, but she was keenly aware that her mother didn't give her father a good look during the meal. As such, the smart little fellow wisely kept her mouth shut and put on her little backpack after breakfast. Perhaps it was because his sister-in-law was too embarrassed to see anyone after the farce last night, so she left the courtyard in the middle of the night, and no one knew where she was now. Shi wanted to explain the situation to her, but he saw that she was being very unapproachable, so he wisely disappeared from her sight. His sister-in-law had left, but Qin Ruoying was still there. Thus, Shi made his way to the west wing and politely knocked on the door before yelling into the room, "Nian Nian, let's go. Daddy will take you to school today." "Okay." The little fellow immediately ran out of the room after hearing Shi's call. As soon as she stepped out of the door, she spread open her arms as if asking Shi to carry her. After Shi picked her up from the ground, the little fellow turned her head and coyly asked into the room, "Mommy, aren't you taking me to school?" The room was quiet, and Qin Ruoying didn't seem to have any intention of replying. The father and daughter waited for a while and couldn't help but look at each other. Thus, the little fellow whispered into Shi's ear, "Daddy, did you make Mommy angry?" "How would I dare?" Shi smiled bitterly and shook his head. Hearing this, the little fellow's big eyes immediately started to spin. "Daddy, do you want me to help you coax Mommy out?" This little fellow was so mischievous, she actually used the word coax. After Shi heard this, he immediately put her back on the ground. The father and daughter looked at each other tacitly. After that, the little fellow seemed to have received some kind of order, and quickly ran back into the room. "Mommy, take me to school, let's take the bus, it's fun." "You haven't been to my school yet. The teacher said she wants to see you." Come on. No matter how the little fellow acted coquettishly, Qin Ruoying didn't reply. In fact, since she woke up, she hadn't said more than 10 words. She was like an observer from outer space, coldly watching everything that happened around her. She only listened, but didn't speak. She didn't speak, nor did she chase the little fellow away. The little fellow grabbed her hand tightly, shaking her head and wagging her tail, constantly acting coquettishly. Finally, Qin Ruoying seemed to be convinced. As soon as she stood up, the little fellow began to drag her out with all her might. Of course, if she didn't want to go out, how could the little fellow pull her? Qin Ruoying did go out, but she still didn't give Shi a good look. She didn't even look at Shi, as if such a big person didn't exist. Therefore, The little fellow held her father's left hand and her mother's right hand, like a bridge between the two. Time to go to school. The sun shines in the sky, the flowers smile at me, the little bird says good morning. Why do you carry explosives on your back? Like the most ordinary family of 3, the little fellow pulled the couple onto the bus to school. Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying didn't speak on the way, but the little fellow seemed to have been injected with stimulants, chattering non-stop along the way, even disturbing the passengers on the side. After Chen Shi apologized to the nearby passengers in a low voice, he didn't stop the little fellow from continuing, but motioned for her to speak softly and slowly. Dad was listening carefully. Big things like arguing with others, small things like who borrowed her eraser. The little fellow chattered non-stop, and Chen Shi listened with interest. And at this time, after getting on the bus, Qin Ruoying, who had been looking out of the window, finally looked like a sculpture that came to life. She turned her head, her eyes paused on Chen Shi's face for a second, and then completely focused on the little fellow. Looking at Nianyan's little face that had turned red with excitement. At that moment, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but reach out and pinch her little face. Chapter 454. Qin Ruoying's subconscious affectionate actions were naturally seen by Chen Shi. Therefore, Chen Shi immediately put on a calm and collected expression, as if to imply that he did not see anything. There were many types of amnesia. The most common situation was not being able to recognize one's loved ones. However, they could still speak, write, draw, and have the ability to take care of themselves in daily life. Therefore, amnesia did not mean that one had lost their intelligence. And it was precisely because Qin Ruoying had lost her memory that everything was so new and strange to her. She was very clear about the meaning of the word mother, but she did not dislike the little fellow calling her mother left and right. Every time she heard the little fellow call her mother, she instinctively wanted to respond. If it was not for the special reserved nature of women stopping her, Qin Ruoying would have already held the little fellow in her arms and caressed him. Of course, Qin Ruoying could accept the little fellow, but it did not mean that she could accept Chen Shi. Women always had to be a little guarded against men. The kind of woman who would completely fall into a man's good intentions could only play the role of a victim in a relationship. The one who cannot get is in an uproar, the one who is favored is fearless. No matter where it was, this sentence was absolutely regarded as the supreme truth. Therefore, even though Chen Shi had already stepped into the insightful emptiness realm, he was still deeply immersed in it, and even somewhat enjoyed it. The capital-affiliated primary school was not far from Hohai, about 7 or 8 stops away. After the family of 3 got off the car, the little fellow, like other children, held his father in one hand and his mother in the other, and skipped towards the school gate. Although the school was chosen by Chen Shi, this was the first time he came, so he could not help but use his divine sense to carefully scan the school. And, overall, it was not bad. At least he did not find any filth hidden under the sanctimonious surface. The management of a primary school was not as loose as a kindergarten, so Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying could not even enter the school gate, and could only stand at the school gate and say goodbye to the little fellow. Dad, goodbye. Mom, goodbye. I will listen to teacher obediently. Remember to pick me up after school. Perhaps it was because Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying were sending Nianyan to school for the first time, and because the couple was too good-looking, even the guards at the entrance couldn't help but take a few more glances at them. Nianyan was the most popular person in the class. Therefore, after many parents sent their children to school, they could not help but stand at the side and whisper to each other. Is that child the one who dared to hit someone on the first day of reporting? Yes, he's in the same class as our Yang. He's very handsome, but his temper is too bad. He doesn't look like a girl at all. I don't know how his family educated him. Didn't you say you were going to fire her last time? Why are you still here? Expelled? Don't joke around. She's the class monitor now. She got full marks in the first half of the exam. Every parent-teacher meeting, she'll be singled out for praise. Oh. This little girl is so powerful. How is she powerful? Isn't it because her family is powerful, At this point, a trace of displeasure flashed across the parent's face. Then, with a look of disdain, she said, "I heard that her family has an education system. They're different from us commoners. Her performance in school directly affects the evaluation of the school. How can a child like this not be powerful?" "I see." Chin-shi quietly listened to the conversation from the side. It was because Nyenyen's performance in school was too outstanding that these parents began to suspect that the school had given Nyenyen special treatment. If one thought about it carefully, this kind of narrow-minded thinking could be understood. Every parent wanted their child to be outstanding and stand out from the crowd. Any child who was able to enter the capital-affiliated primary school had at least gone through several rounds of screening. Basically, it could be concluded that they were good seedlings that far surpassed their peers. But it was a pity that excellence was always measured by comparison. Compared to Nyenyen, even the smartest and most outstanding child could only be reduced to ordinary in the end. After all, when it came to comparing fathers, no one could compare to her. When he left the last time, Chin-shi was worried that he would take a long time to come back, so he took the initiative to remove the first layer of seal on Nyenyen's body. It was also from then on that Nyenyen gradually became different from other children. Although Nyenyen didn't know how to cultivate, she had already found a sense of chi when she was 5 years old. This innate affinity for spirit energy was something that many people didn't have. This was the so-called talent that was bestowed to her by God. Others couldn't be envious of it. Chin-shi had been gone for more than a year, and Nyenyen had also been washed by the tide of spirit energy in the courtyard for more than a year. She was still young, so she couldn't see anything for the time being. But if she continued to develop at this speed, it was estimated that it wouldn't be long before Nyenyen would be able to skip a grade. Skip from 1st grade to 3rd grade, 3rd grade to 6th grade. Skip from 1st grade to 3rd grade, and directly enter university in 1st grade. At that time, she probably wouldn't be an adult and would have graduated from university. Could it be, in the future, would he have to send Nyenyen to the junior class of the Chinese Academy of Science? Chin-shi was still seriously thinking about whether to put the seal back. After Qin Ruoying saw Nyenyen's figure disappear, she turned around and walked out along the street. Seeing this, Chin-shi had to temporarily put this problem to the back of his mind, and then quickly followed. "Hey, Ying, where are you going?" This time, there was no little guy in the middle to act as a bridge, so Chin-shi didn't dare to follow too closely. Seeing that he was so self-conscious, Qin Ruoying let him be. As a result, the couple who were incomparably loving in the past were now like a couple who quarreled and broke up. One in front and one behind, they were silent and walked aimlessly on the street. Well, in addition to taking care of Nyenyen's daily life, Chin-shi also had to pay attention to not let his wife get lost at all times, back to the cloud-piercing shuttle that accidentally broke into the Tianshu ruins. This cloud-piercing shuttle was not simple. Its source of power was completely dependent on spirit stones. As long as there were enough spirit stones, it could even cross the entire Milky Way. Earth was about 6 billion kilometers away from the Oort Nebula. Even if it flew at the speed of light, it would take nearly 6 hours to reach it. Although the cloud-piercing shuttle's flying speed did not exceed the speed of light, it could perform short-distance space jumps. And this was the embodiment of the true meaning of the word void that Dongshu stage cultivators used. Chunghua and Yi Ji. Just like that, the two daring youths piloted the cloud-piercing shuttle towards the direction of the sun. Along the way, they discovered many planets, from Pluto to Neptune, then to Saturn and Jupiter. Although these planets were large in size, they were all dead planets. So even though the two of them kept stopping along the way, they quickly arrived at Mars. After Chunghua drove the cloud-piercing shuttle around Mars, an aqua-blue planet came into view. Yi Ji was the first to discover that this planet was different from the rest. The planet's environment directly affected its color, so under normal circumstances, one only needed to look at the color of the planet to determine if it was suitable for habitation. Earth was aqua-blue, like a sparkling and translucent sapphire. It was very beautiful. But the most eye-catching thing about it was the spirit chi of heaven and earth that kept flowing out. This was a sacred cultivation ground? Yi Ji was stunned. After being stunned for a long while, he excitedly pulled on Cheng Hua's sleeve and shouted, "Cheng Hua, look, there's spirit chi on that planet. Please remember the domain name of this book." 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Website. Chapter 455. Not every planet could nurture life, and not every planet could produce heaven and earth spirit chi. Therefore, planets like Earth that could nurture life and produce heaven and earth spirit chi at the same time were usually extremely rare. Cultivators would call such an existence a holy land for cultivation. The important thing to mention here was, although it could be called a holy land for cultivation as long as it met the above 2 conditions, the holy land for cultivation did not necessarily refer to a single planet. Even if it was just a void crack in the universe, or a continent formed after a planet shattered, as long as it could nurture life and produce heaven and earth spirit chi at the same time, it could be called a holy land for cultivation. Because of the effect of gravity, all the planets in the universe were spherical. It was impossible for there to be a situation where the sky was round and the earth was round like in ancient myths. If there was, then this holy land for cultivation would definitely not be a celestial body that existed naturally, but something forcefully created by a high-level cultivator with supreme magic power. For example, a strange existence like a great world. Earth was really too beautiful. It was a natural product from the chaotic universe. How could man-made things compare to it? The Supreme Palace enclosure sounded very powerful, right? It was actually just a continental plate floating in the universe. Enclosure, read, Yuan, as in broken walls and ruins. Cheng Hua and Yi Ji had grown up in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Even though they would explore other planets when they had nothing to do, looking for life planets for fun, they had never found a true planet-level holy land for cultivation. The universe was really too big. If the Supreme Palace enclosure was a grape, then Earth, which was much bigger than it, was an apple. A bright red apple. Therefore, the 2 youths were like Columbus who had discovered a new continent. They were so excited that they could not control themselves. The Dubhe Ruins. It really was the Dubhe Ruins. Since it could be called a ruin, then the cultivation heritage on this planet had probably been cut off a long time ago. And didn't this mean that they could create their own heritage here and take the Dubhe Ruins for themselves? Let's go and take a look. After hearing Yi Ji's words, Cheng Hua carefully sized up the planet. After he confirmed that there were no defensive formations on it, Cheng Hua could no longer contain his excitement. He drove the cloud-piercing shuttle and rushed over. Wait, we haven't confirmed if there's any danger up there. If we barge in rashly like this, we won't be able to deal with any danger with our current cultivation, so I think we should inform our family first and wait for them to send reinforcements. As he spoke, Yi Ji took out a voice transmission spirit talisman. Seeing this, Cheng Hua couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, he pretended to be indifferent and replied, "Well, okay. Wait a moment, I'll activate the talisman now." Ch Chung 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 Chan Chung Ch Chung. Cheng Hua actually took advantage of the time when he was distracted, and snatched the talisman from his hand, and fiercely tore it into pieces. Chung Chs Chung Ch. Cheng Hua's actions angered Yi Ji. Just as he was about to teach Cheng Hua a lesson, Cheng Hua completely ignored him. Instead, he directly made the cloud-piercing shuttle perform a space leap. Whoosh! Yi Ji felt his vision blur. When he could see his surroundings clearly again, he realized that he was already in the orbit of the moon. The blue planet was not far in front of him. Because they were so close, Yi Ji could even see the mountains and rivers on the ground with his naked eyes. Seeing this, Yi Ji was not happy. Instead, he was angry. He hurriedly turned his head and realized that the high-grade spirit stone at the front of the ship had lost its luster. This was a sign that the spirit stone had been used up. Their cultivation levels were too low, so they could only rely on the spirit stone to drive the cloud-piercing shuttle. If they were flying normally, it would be fine. There was no resistance in the universe, so the consumption would be very low. But if they performed a space leap, every space leap was equivalent to the full-strength attack of a Dongshu stage cultivator. Thus, even a high-grade spirit stone of exceptional quality could not support the cloud-piercing shuttle to perform space leaps frequently. The two of them had only brought a total of 2 upper-grade spirit stones with them this time. Now that they had wasted one, how could Eiji not feel distressed? Are you crazy? You want to jump such a short distance? Once the spirit stone is used up, what are we going to do? Don't tell me you really want to fly back slowly? Eiji looked as if he expected better from him. Changhua, on the other hand, smiled cheekily and did not seem to mind. Their cultivations were on par with each other, so it was impossible for Eiji to take him down easily. Tell me, what exactly do you want? Seeing Eiji's impatient expression, Changhua knew that he was really angry this time. Thus, Changhua immediately put away his cheeky smile and said to Eiji in an extremely serious tone, Eiji, have you heard of an old saying? Life and death are up to fate. Riches and honor are found in danger. Since the two of us can obtain this opportunity, why should we be so cautious and overcautious? You and I are both bastards in our families. We are not well liked. Once the news gets out, we will not be able to eat meat and soup. Hearing this, Eiji could not help but interrupt him. He said anxiously, do you really think this heavenly pivot ruins is a good place? There might be some great danger lurking within. With the cultivation of the two of us. Whether it is dangerous or not, we will know once we explore. Changhua did not wait for Eiji to finish and interrupted him decisively. He had already made his decision. So no matter how much Eiji objected, Changhua had to go and explore today. Eiji wanted stability. Changhua wanted danger. This was the first time the two of them had such a huge difference in opinion. Changhua stiffened his neck and refused to budge. Seeing this, Eiji could only sigh and compromise. Fine, I am afraid of you. I will listen to you, but you must remember, the moment we discover anything wrong, we must leave this place immediately. I do not want to be buried with you. His anger was real, and so was his friendship. Seeing Changhua so determined, Eiji could only let him be. All right, don't worry, I may be brave, but I am not stupid. Moreover, we still have the cloud-piercing shuttle. Even if we encounter danger, we can easily retreat. Changhua blinked and began to pilot the cloud-piercing shuttle towards Earth. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Website. Chapter 456. Which places on Earth had the densest spiritual energy? If one were to look abroad, then Europe's Vatican, the Middle East's Jerusalem, Spain's Santiago, India's Lily Garden, and Nepal's Kathmandu were all places with extremely abundant spiritual energy. As the saying goes, rain and dew are all touched. Earth was so big, so naturally, it was impossible for all the spiritual energy to be concentrated in Huaxia. Therefore, under the constant baptism of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, many legacies similar to cultivators appeared abroad, such as the onmyoges and ninjas of Japan, the knights, sorcerers, and vampires of Europe, the pharaohs and mummies of Egypt, as well as the black magic and voodoo of South Asia. These legacies seemed to be varied, but in essence, they were not much different from the legacies of the orthodox cultivators. And this seemed to coincide with the old saying, the great Tao flowed like mercury, and every grain was round. However, perhaps it was because they had only appeared for a short time, so most of the cultivation legacies abroad had not formed a complete system. If they were compared to primitive people who had just entered the Stone Age, then the cultivation legacy represented by Qin Shi was obviously a high-level cosmic civilization that could freely travel the stars. The difference between the two was no less than the difference between heaven and earth. It was precisely because of this that Qin Shi guessed that the ancient cultivators represented by the Taiqing divine ancestor might have come to earth from a cultivation holy land. Otherwise, how could one explain the existence of Tiandu? The recovery of spiritual energy was a very long process. Just like when it was exhausted, the whole process might last 10 years, 100 years, or even 1,000 years. However, even if the spiritual energy of heaven and earth on earth had not reached its peak, just based on the current situation, Earth was already very suitable for cultivators to live and reproduce here. In the eyes of Cheng Hua and Yi Ji, Earth was like a new continent that had not been discovered by Columbus. The environment here was good and resources were abundant. The only bad thing was, it was probably the indigenous people who had a population of 7 billion. There were indeed too many people. Moreover, most of them had poor aptitudes and were not worth absorbing. Even if they captured these people and brought them back to do hard labor, Cheng Hua would feel that it was a waste of food. The two of them quietly landed on Earth on the cloud-piercing shuttle. The place where they landed, it was none other than Yellowstone Park, where Qin Shi had refined the Adumbra flower. The spirit qi in this place was surging, and some of the medicinal power left behind by Qin Shi when he was refining pills could be faintly felt. Therefore, Yellowstone Park naturally became the first stop of their trip. If I remember the name correctly, this should be a low-level technological civilization. Cheng Hua steered the cloud-piercing shuttle through the skies of the United States. Occasionally, he would lower his head to look at the buildings below. Naturally, the buildings on Earth were extremely strange to the two of them. Although Cheng Hua was young, he could be considered to be experienced and knowledgeable. Therefore, he recognized at a glance that Earth's development was a little off track. The once glorious Tianshu ruins, how could they have been reduced to a mediocre technological civilization? One had to know that technological civilizations were usually born on planets without spiritual energy. The Tianshu ruins clearly had the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, so why did the development of Earth's civilization deviate? In this regard, although Cheng Hua was somewhat puzzled, he was more pleasantly surprised in his heart. Along the way, he did not detect any signs of true origin fluctuations on anyone, so he could basically be sure that this was a cultivation holy land without any immortal cultivator's inheritance. And what did this mean? It meant that even if he was only at the golden core stage, he could do whatever he wanted here without any fear. When he thought of this, Cheng Hua was suddenly very excited. He could not help but want to remove his aura concealment technique and directly descend on Earth as if he was the king of the world. Seeing this, Yi Ji was still able to remain sober for the time being. Don't get excited, let's find out the truth first. Even if it's a low-level technological civilization, there should be some kind of weapon that can threaten us. The two of us are new here, so it's better not to be too ostentatious. After all, to these natives, we're guests from the boundless starry sky. Yi Ji seemed to be advising Cheng Hua to be careful. In reality, even he could not help but feel a little arrogant at this moment. After all, the two of them were only teenagers. If they were not arrogant when they were young, why would they enter the world? Of course, being arrogant was one thing, but for the sake of caution, Yi Ji still suggested that they capture one of the natives to understand the situation. Okay, we'll do as you say. I'll go capture one of them and ask about the situation. After saying that, without waiting for Yi Ji to reply, Cheng Hua could no longer suppress the excitement in his heart. He actually jumped out of the cloud-piercing shuttle just like that. One had to know that the two of them were now in a small town not far from Yellowstone Park. This was a tourist town. There were not many residents, only about 1,000 or so. After Cheng Hua jumped out of the cloud-piercing shuttle, he flew straight to the market in the center of the town like Superman. He did not hide his figure anymore. Instead, he deliberately grabbed an unlucky young man in front of everyone in the market. This young man was bound by his true origin. Instantly, he was like a doll in a claw machine, lifted into the air by an invisible hand. Who is the person in charge here? Tell him to come out and see me. At this moment, the two of them were very much like bandits going down the mountain to rob someone. The target of the robbery was naturally the mansion of a big family on Earth. Yi Ji's idea was to first disguise as a servant and infiltrate the mansion. After finding out the situation, he would then take over the mansion in one fell swoop. However, Cheng Hua could not be bothered to do such a thing. When the bandits came to rob, the owner was not at home. Could it be that the bandits would obediently wait for the owner to come back? The most straightforward method was to openly go to the door like Cheng Hua did. Not only could he immediately find out the strength of the mansion's defenses, but he could also force the owner of the mansion to appear immediately. Wouldn't that be the fastest way to go? Cheng Hua's attitude was not very friendly. Coupled with his shocking appearance, it instantly scared the people in the market. The people of the United States had always been obsessed with filming superhero blockbusters. But Cheng Hua right now, wasn't he very much like the villains that often appeared in movies? The unlucky young man was scared witless by Cheng Hua on the spot. He talked a lot, but Cheng Hua didn't understand what he was talking about. In this regard, Cheng Hua was not in a hurry. He directly took out a spiritual talisman from his pocket and slapped it between the young man's eyebrows. The function of this spiritual talisman was very simple, and that was to translate. It did not translate the young man's words word by word. Instead, it copied the young man's words with one spirit. Almost instantly, Cheng Hua could learn the language used by the young man. However, just as Cheng Hua was busy learning English, a very discordant sound suddenly rang out in the market. Bang! 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 It was the sound of a gunshot. Seeing that Cheng Hua could freely float in the air like Superman and make threatening moves to the town's residents, the town's police patrolling the market directly took out their guns and decisively fired. Chapter 457. This scene was really similar to the movie Superman, Man of Steel. But whether it was in the movie or in reality, when the United States police encountered a similar incident, they would definitely do the same decisively, take out a gun and shoot. It couldn't be helped. Who asked the people abroad to live in the abyss of suffering all year round? The police's actions were understandable, but when all this fell into Cheng Hua's eyes, his reaction was much more intense than the villain in the movie. You want to die? A mere 5.56mm bullet naturally could not penetrate Cheng Hua's protective aura. But, this provocative action also successfully provoked Cheng Hua's anger. He was the pride of the Supreme Palace enclosure. How could he tolerate this group of lowly ants wantonly provoking him? So, without any hesitation, Cheng Hua directly formed a sword with the fingers of his left hand and pointed at the unlucky United States police below. Then, a small metal sword about 3 inches long suddenly shot out from Cheng Hua's sleeve. The small metal sword was extremely fast. The townsfolk next to them only saw a flash of white light in the air. When they turned their heads to look at the police, they saw that there was a 2-finger-wide wound between his eyebrows, and blood kept gushing out from it. The police fell to the ground. The townsfolk were suddenly in a mess. And just as everyone screamed and fled back to their houses, a burst of urgent sirens suddenly sounded on the street not far away. It must be mentioned here that the United States was not only the country with the highest crime rate in the world, but also the country with the fastest police speed in the world. Therefore, just as Cheng Hua killed a police officer, the town police station had already received the news and organized a large group of people to rush here. Cheng Hua naturally heard the movement in the distance, but he had no intention of hiding. Instead, he just floated over the market and threw the young man he caught before to the ground. One had to know that Cheng Hua was now flying in the sky, about 4 or 5 stories above the ground. Therefore, when the young man fell to the ground, he immediately let out a heart-wrenching scream. However, Cheng Hua didn't seem to hear it. Instead, he was still looking at the various objects and decorations in the market with interest. Such an act of disregard for life was indeed in line with the old saying, "Those who are not of my race are bound to have a different heart." Just a low-level technological civilization. In Cheng Hua's opinion, these people were actually more like ants walking upright, so how could he possibly feel guilty for trampling a few ants to death? Cheng Hua was deliberately looking for trouble today. The bigger the commotion, the more they could use it to find out the details of the Tianshu ruins. This action seemed a little reckless, but in fact, it was the most direct and effective method. After all, Cheng Hua had the cloud-piercing shuttle with him. Even if he really encountered any danger, he could use the cloud-piercing shuttle to escape. It was truly a situation where one could advance to attack or retreat to defend. Before the battle had even begun, one had already obtained the initiative. Cheng Hua's provocation with great fanfare quickly attracted the town's police department's encirclement and suppression. Towards this non-human existence, the police chief was very wise not to shout and persuade him to surrender. Instead, he directly ordered Cheng Hua to be killed on the spot. The equipment of the United States Police was much better than the equipment of the Huaxia Police. Following the police chief's shout of fire, the town that hadn't been so lively in a long time suddenly became as lively as the new year. A series of crackling gunshots rang out, more lively than the fireworks of the new year. In an instant, countless bullets shot out from the barrel of the gun and rained down on Cheng Hua. The United States Police never gave criminals any chance to speak, but unfortunately, Cheng Hua wasn't an ordinary criminal. He was a golden core cultivator who could fly in the sky and burrow into the ground. How could he be injured by mere bullets? Therefore, Cheng Hua was like watching a tiger's performance through glass in a zoo. No matter how the other party bared their fangs and brandished their claws at him, he just quietly flew in the air without moving. The bullets were all blocked by the protective chi around his body. After the first round of attacks, when everyone was busy reloading, Cheng Hua's voice slowly rang out above the market. "Are you done? Then it's my turn." The United States people couldn't understand his alien language, but that didn't matter. Because they would soon fall asleep forever. Cheng Hua waved his hand and dozens of small metal swords flew out of his sleeves. Wherever the small swords passed, blood sprayed out. In just a breath's time, the town regained its tranquility. Cheng Hua looked at the pile of corpses below in boredom, but then he lost interest and muttered, "Too weak." He was still floating in the air above the market as if he was demonstrating his power. Not long after the town's police station was wiped out, the news spread quickly, layer by layer. In the end, it directly alarmed the higher-ups of the United States military. After hearing that the other party might be in existence comparable to a superhero, the army station near Yellowstone Park immediately took action. The United States people's exoskeleton technology was becoming more and more mature. In terms of individual strength, soldiers wearing exoskeleton armor were not weaker than peak-strength martial artists. However, it was this special operations team that had the best individual ability in the U.S. Army that was monitoring their bodily functions was completely disabled the moment they got close to Cheng Hua. Warning. Warning. This is a cultivator from Huaxia. His strength is far beyond X level. It was strange. Although Cheng Hua came from outside the solar system, he still had a standard Asian appearance. Moreover, he was different from the emaciated and sallow Asians in Southeast Asia. Therefore, the United States military recognized him as a Huaxia person almost immediately. A celestial from Huaxia? Why did he suddenly come to the United States to cause trouble? One should know that there were many unwritten rules in this world. One of them was, existences above peak strength usually did not step out of the country. The reason was very simple. Once a peak strength grandmaster left the country, the United States people would use all kinds of methods to capture these grandmasters who were close to superpowers for experiments. They wanted to perfect their exoskeleton armor through science and achieve the goal of mass-producing peak strength grandmasters. Japan was the little brother of the United States people. Moreover, the Yin-Yang Liao controlled almost all the practitioners in Japan. Therefore, the United States people rarely captured Yin-Yang masters for experiments. Huaxia and Japan were different. There were too many rogue practitioners in Huaxia. There were simply too many existences like Sun Wen. Therefore, they became the main source of experimental materials. Although martial artists and necromancers had combat strength far beyond ordinary people, they were still too weak to fight against the state machine. You know martial arts, I know science. Even peak-strength martial artists knew how to cherish their lives. How could a celestial easily provoke the United States? Other than Chen Shi, no one would want to test the power of a nuclear bomb. X level was very powerful and rare. The United States people had been coveting this level for a long time. They just could not find suitable experimental materials. Therefore, when the Pentagon confirmed that Cheng Hua was at least X level, the senior military officials present were collectively excited. As long as they captured this X level, the bottleneck of exoskeleton armor technology would be able to achieve a breakthrough. God bless the United States. Chapter 458. Ever since the end of the Second War of Independence, the United States had never been baptized by the flames of war. It could not be helped. After all, the United States was the only superpower in the world today. Their tyrannical military strength gave the United States great confidence. Therefore, they had always been the ones to behave atrociously in other people's territory. Now, how could they tolerate others to behave atrociously in their territory? Therefore, the moment the Special Operations Team was destroyed, the Department of Homeland Security and the National Guard had already organized and sent a large group of people to the front line. The American Army needed to gather, but Chung Hua did not need to. While he was waiting for the other party's reinforcements to arrive, Chung Hua was so bored that he started to wander around the town's market. About 20 minutes later, the first batch of National Guard arrived at the scene. The American Army first alienated the local townspeople through the broadcast. Then, they started to persuade Chung Hua to surrender. At this time, Chung Hua could already understand English. However, he ignored all these words and did not take them to heart at all. It was just a low-level technological civilization. Could they really hurt him? Chung Hua had already seen the power of the 5.56mm bullet. This kind of attack that was like scratching an itch also caused Chung Hua's judgment of the threat of the Tianshu ruins to drop by several levels. Therefore, Chung Hua could not help but feel a little arrogant. He even hoped that the other party could give him a little surprise. However, he did not expect that this surprise would come so quickly. Chung Hua had greatly underestimated the lethality of a technological civilization. Therefore, he did not prepare any defense at all. After waiting for the townspeople to evacuate and there was no response after 3 rounds of shouting, the American Army officially launched an attack on Chung Hua. Swoosh! Following a loud and ear-piercing sonic boom, an anti-tank missile hit the shop Chung Hua was in. The surrounding shops also instantly turned into a sea of fire in this explosion. The bullet could not penetrate Chung Hua's protective chi, but the anti-tank missile was different. In his carelessness, Chung Hua was sent flying by the anti-tank missile. If it weren't for the fact that he still had a defensive magic treasure on him, he was afraid that he would have suffered heavy injuries on the spot because of this. The dust raised by the collapse of the house made Chung Hua look a little dusty. After a brief moment of shock, Chung Hua was completely enraged. How infuriating! This was the first time Chung Hua had been so angry. On one hand, it was because he had almost been injured by the missile. On the other hand, it was because Yi Ji was lying on the cloud-piercing shuttle and laughing at him. However, it was a pity. In the end, these actions were futile. The small metal swords quickly rushed into the American Army's armored battle group. It did not matter whether it was the drivers hiding in the armored vehicles or the fully armed soldiers. In front of the small metal swords, human lives were as cheap as grass. A light cut would instantly cause a large number of them to fall. In less than 5 minutes, this rapid reaction force of 3,000 people had been completely wiped off the face of the earth by Chung Hua. Fresh blood stained the ground red. The vast grassland that was bustling with noise and excitement earlier seemed to have turned into a mass grave 10 miles away at that moment. Even from afar, one could smell the thick stench of blood in the air. Such indiscriminate killing, Chung Hua, I'm afraid you're going to suffer retribution in the future. Yi Ji looked at the battlefield below and could not help but frown deeply. He really did not expect that Chung Hua was actually so vicious and merciless. Looking at the situation, Chung Hua did not seem to treat these golden-haired natives as humans at all. The scene had already been broadcasted through the satellite and was clearly presented on the big screen of the battle command at the rear. At this moment, the entire battle command was silent. Almost everyone was stunned by the tragic and bloody scene in front of them. Nuclear bomb. Request to use nuclear bomb. After coming back to his senses, the supreme commander of this battle seemed to have gone mad as he frantically requested the military headquarters to use nuclear bomb. However, what no one expected was, the military headquarters actually rejected his request very decisively. The Yellowstone Park supervolcano is in an active period. Once the nuclear bomb is used, it is very likely to cause the supervolcano to erupt accidentally. The moment he heard this reason, the colonel despaired. However, what he did not know was, when the military headquarters rejected his use of nuclear bomb, they also submitted another request to the White House. The use of nuclear bomb is restricted. The military situation is urgent. Please inform Hua Xia and ask Wu Lian to urgently dispatch X-level military support to us. Time slowly passed by. 2 hours later, a supersonic fighter from Hua Xia finally landed at Yellowstone Airport. This was the first time Wu Lian was invited to perform a mission in the United States, so Hua Xia attached great importance to this mission. The United States was tens of thousands of kilometers away from Hua Xia. If it weren't for the cooperation of the two countries that provided several air refueling services for the fighter within their own jurisdiction, this supersonic fighter wouldn't have been able to arrive at Yellowstone Park in just 2 hours. The mission difficulty was X. Only success was allowed, failure was not allowed. The person in charge of receiving Hua Xia's personnel was the colonel from before. He was now reduced to a commander without an army, so when he heard that Hua Xia sent support, an undisguised anger appeared on the colonel's face. Instead of finding a way to solve their own problems, they actually went to the enemy country for help. The colonel was very dissatisfied with the military's arrangement, but due to the orders of his superiors, he had to personally come to greet them. But soon, the dissatisfaction on the colonel's face turned into shock. The military rejected his application for a nuclear bomb, and the last solution they came up with, they actually invited a woman from Hua Xia for support. A woman? A woman? This was a very beautiful and cold woman. Even though the colonel was used to seeing beauties from different countries, at this moment, he couldn't help but feel stunned. The colonel was slightly distracted. The woman had long been used to his loss of composure. Therefore, after a trace of disgust flashed in her eyes, she coldly said, "Where are they?" She spoke the most standard American English. After the colonel heard this, he suddenly seemed to come back to his senses and quickly extended his hand to invite the woman to the Battle Command Center for a detailed discussion. Based on this situation, this woman should be the person in charge of Hua Xia? Reinforcements should still be on the way. The colonel pondered and couldn't help but look up and down at the woman. But what he didn't expect was, the woman actually rejected his invitation without any hesitation. No need. After speaking, the woman flew up into the air in front of everyone, and then flew straight to the location of the town. Like a comet, the woman's figure quickly disappeared into the horizon. At this moment, the colonel couldn't help but open his mouth wide. He looked in the direction that the woman disappeared and couldn't help but mutter, "Oh, my God. She's Superwoman." Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book Mobile Version Website, .com. Chapter 460. There was no doubt about it. This extremely beautiful and cold woman who came all the way from Hua Xia was obviously Qin Shueqing, who had just woken up from her coma a few days ago. With such a beautiful and capable daughter, Wang Chuanju and Qin Yongwang really benefited a lot from her. As a result, the couple's status in the Wu Lian had been rising steadily in recent years. Qin Shueqing was in charge of external affairs, while Qin Yongwang and his wife were in charge of internal affairs. The family had become a giant within the Wu Lian. And this was without taking into account the mysterious foreign aide, Mr. Chen. Hua Xia attached great importance to the United States' request for help this time, so after the Wu Lian received the news, they immediately began to strictly select the candidates for the battle. Qin Shueqing was not the only X level in the Wu Lian, nor was she the strongest X level. However, she was the only X level who took the initiative to apply for the battle. No one knew if Qin Shueqing had eaten gunpowder recently, but after returning to the headquarters in Shangjing, she had a cold face all day long. In addition, she had disappeared for more than a year, so when she came back this time, not many people dared to talk to her. Perhaps it was because of some kind of violence gene hidden in her bones, so after she saw the battle video from the United States, this woman who looked forward to going on a mission all day suddenly couldn't sit still. Before the higher-ups even made a formal decision, Qin Shueqing had already gone to the airport to prepare for departure. Not everyone was as violent as her, and not everyone liked to use war to support war. Since Qin Shueqing wanted to do this kind of thankless task, no one would jump out to compete with her. So, Qin Shueqing set off. Although the enemy in the battle video looked to be only 15 or 16 years old, Qin Shueqing didn't underestimate the enemy at all. Instead, she adjusted her state of mind along the way, hoping to be in the best state to face this mysterious celestial being. This was also the first time she had officially fought someone since breaking through to the celestial being level. Qin Shueqing soon arrived above the town that the colonel had mentioned. Her arrival naturally alarmed the two youths who were drinking in the town's bar. Then, with a beer bottle in one hand and a chocolate in the other, Chunghua swaggered out of the bar. As soon as he stepped out of the bar, Chunghua saw this strange woman with a cold and arrogant face. Qin Shueqing quietly floated above the market. Chunghua stood casually at the entrance of the bar. He raised his head slightly and looked at her. Chunghua sized up the woman in front of him. Qin Shueqing was also sizing up the young man in front of him. The two stared at each other for a few seconds before Chunghua seemed to have thought of something. He couldn't help but grin, and then greeted her in the broken English he had just learned, "Hello?" Hearing this, Qin Shueqing didn't immediately reply. Instead, she frowned slightly. Perhaps it was because she had lived in the same courtyard as Qin Shi for a long time, but Qin Shueqing's perception of true essence was slightly better than other cultivators of the same level. Although this young man in front of her was young, his true essence fluctuations were definitely something that only X-level cultivators could have. X level, which was the level above the celestial being level. At the same time, it was also known as Golden Core level. Yi followed Chunghua out of the bar. At this moment, a trace of seriousness appeared on Qin Wanqing's face. Two people. There was clearly something wrong with the information provided by the United States. Yi had always been cautious. Even after leaving the cloud-piercing shuttle, he didn't remove the aura concealment technique on his body. Thus, the drone didn't discover his existence at all. Although Qin Shueqing had a strong personality, she wasn't a reckless person. The two young men in front of her had a similar level of cultivation as her. If she had known that this would happen, she would have brought more people with her. However, it was too late to say anything now. The enemy was right in front of her. Running away before the battle was not Qin Shueqing's style. Thus, after hesitating for a moment, she asked coldly, "Where are the two of you from? Who are you from? Why are you causing trouble here today?" Qin Shueqing thought that the two of them were the disciples of some hidden expert. Thus, she didn't hold back. The moment she stepped forward, she acted as if she was going to interrogate them for their crimes. Seeing this, Chunghua didn't immediately reply. Instead, he secretly used his divine consciousness to discuss with Yi. "This woman's cultivation level seems to be about the same as ours. If that's the case, the inheritance of the Tian Shu ruins shouldn't have been lost." The two of them silently discussed. Qin Shueqing's appearance also successfully stopped the two of them from continuing to act presumptuously. Since the Tian Shu ruins still had the inheritance of immortal cultivators, they urgently needed to confirm a question. That was, what exactly was the cultivation level of this woman in front of them considered in the Tian Shu ruins? If she was just a small fry, then there must be a very powerful sect behind her. Under such circumstances, the two of them could only give up the opportunity to get the first prize and return to the Supreme Palace enclosure to seek help. However, if the cultivation level of this woman in front of them was considered to be one of the best in the Tian Shu ruins, didn't that mean that, the Tianshu ruins were already in their pockets? The two of them had the cloud-piercing shuttle in their hands. If it weren't for the fact that Cheng Hua had a defensive magic treasure on him, which reduced the majority of Qin Shueqing's strength, Cheng Hua would have been slapped into the ground by Qin Shueqing. Cheng Hua. Yi Ji watched anxiously from the side. He wanted to help, but the two of them were too close. He was afraid that he would accidentally hurt his companion, so Yi Ji didn't dare to rashly make a move. However, Cheng Hua wasn't stupid. After dozens of palms, he finally found a gap. At the cost of taking a palm from Qin Shueqing, he successfully shook off Qin Shueqing's entanglement. This time, Cheng Hua finally learned to be smart. When he saw that Qin Shueqing still wanted to go forward, he darted back to Yi Ji's side and hurriedly took out his sword case from his sumra mustard seed bag. Cheng Hua, be careful. This woman's technique is very strange. It seems like she likes to fight in close quarters. As he said that, Yi Ji also took out his magic treasure. Hearing that, Cheng Hua's face was full of anger and hatred as he said, I know. I almost fell into her trap just now. Don't interfere first. Let me deal with her. Cheng Hua's magic treasure was the sword case in his hand. The case was 3 feet long and yellow all over. The tail was inlaid with a group of charred black ornaments, so it was called Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail. It was a 9th grade spirit treasure and was really rare. Once the Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail case was in his hand, the battle flames in Cheng Hua's heart immediately burned fiercely. Don't look at how Qin Shueqing's palm technique made him unable to fight back at all. In reality, Cheng Hua didn't suffer any substantial damage at all. After all, Qin Shueqing's current moves were figured out by herself. Now that she was still at the stage of deliberation, how powerful could they be? It was like a boorish man with nothing but brute strength. So even if Qin Shueqing had an extraordinary accumulation of vital essence, she still couldn't fully utilize the power of this vital essence. After a bout of fruitless fighting, Qin Shueqing clearly understood her disadvantage. Therefore, she didn't want to give Cheng Hua any chance to catch his breath and directly rushed over again. But this time, Cheng Hua, who was already prepared, directly threw out the sword case in his hand. Different from Chen Shi's all swords in one, the small metal swords in the Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail case were all real objects. Each of the small metal swords could freely attack under the guidance of Cheng Hua's divine telekinesis. The sword case was the mother sword, and the small swords were the child swords. The child swords were kept in the mother sword and constantly nourished, while the small swords were infinite. And this was the so-called hidden swords in the case. Of course, with Cheng Hua's current cultivation, he actually couldn't control all the child swords in the sword case as he wished. But this was already enough. Attack! At Cheng Hua's command, countless small metal swords instantly flew out of the Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail case. These small swords were like crows, covering half the sky the moment they appeared. Seeing this, Qin Shueqing was calm and unafraid. Although she didn't have any Dharma treasures, her martial intent was already above that of ordinary Dharma treasures. Afraid before the battle? Impossible. Forever impossible. If she was afraid, then she wouldn't be her. Qin Shueqing poured all the vital essence in her body into her limbs and bones, and her body instantly became as hard as iron. Her joints moved, and her whole body immediately emitted bursts of thunder. And this was the performance of martial arts cultivation at the peak, bones and tendons piercing, tiger-leopard thunder. And as Qin Shueqing punched out, an ear-piercing sound suddenly rang in the air. Streams of vital essence visible to the naked eye were like tornadoes, instantly knocking away all the small metal swords in front of her. Facing the sky full of sword rain, Qin Shueqing angrily went against the flow. At this moment, she was like an unsheathed sword. She actually tore a crack in the sky full of sword rain. Humph. Still barehanded at this time, are you here to die? Seeing that she still didn't take out her Dharma treasures under such circumstances, Changhua instantly made a judgment in his heart. Tianshu ruins, as expected, it still declined. The woman in front of him with a decent cultivation but an ordinary cultivation method was probably the only powerhouse in the Tianshu ruins that could be taken out? Otherwise, how could she not be able to take out even a suitable magical artifact? Thinking of this, Changhua couldn't help but have a fierce look in his eyes. He immediately clasped his hands in front of his chest, and then quickly formed a hand seal. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 462. At that moment, thousands of small swords seemed to have turned into a huge dragon made of metal blades. Countless sharp blades shone with cold light under the sun. The densely packed small metal swords covered most of the sky. Under Chonghua's command, these small metal swords were like obedient fish. They gathered together, and the tip of the sword was pointed at Qin Wanqing, who was charging towards him at high speed. Seeing the flying swords like rain, Qin Xueqing was not afraid at all. She brazenly faced them with her bare hands. Warriors did not need weapons because their bodies were the most powerful weapons. Qin Xueqing infused her vital essence into her limbs and bones, so that a layer of faint light appeared on her originally slightly white skin. From a distance, she was like a bodhisattva carefully carved out of cold jade. It was exactly like the old saying in books, skin of ice, bones of jade, makeup of jade. Do not fear the angry eyes of the bodhisattva. Although Qin Xueqing's momentum was strong. But it was a pity that her exploration of martial arts was still at the beginning stage. Now, with only her mortal body, how could she resist Changhua's phoenix perch scorched tail box? Countless small metal swords kept hitting Qin Xueqing's protective shield. At first, Qin Wanqing could still rely on the quintessential essence in her body to repel the small swords. However, as wave after wave of flying swords continued to attack, Qin Wanqing's protective shield couldn't help but begin to weaken. Soon, a small metal sword successfully pierced through her protective shield. Qin Xueqing could not dodge in time. This small sword immediately left a shallow wound on her face. This was just the beginning. As soon as the protective shield was broken, the small metal swords swarmed up like crazy bees. Seeing this, Qin Xueqing decisively abandoned her own defense. At the price of sacrificing the protective shield, she instantly increased her speed by a lot. Of course. The result of this was obvious. Countless small wounds suddenly appeared on Qin Xueqing's body. Changhua had been deliberately keeping a distance from Qin Xueqing. Every time Qin Xueqing took a step forward, he would decisively take a step back. Seeing Qin Xueqing suddenly accelerate, Changhua didn't react in time, and Qin Xueqing successfully closed in on him. Bitch, do you really think I'm afraid of you? Changhua was also quite experienced in facing enemies. Seeing that Qin Xueqing was too strong, he didn't panic at all. A fierce look flashed in his eyes, and then he suddenly pulled out a 3-feet-long sword from the phoenix perch scorched tail case. This was the primordial sword, and also one of the most important parts of the phoenix perch scorched tail case. Very few people knew about the existence of the primordial sword. Ever since Changhua obtained the phoenix perch scorched tail box, he had been using it as a killing move. Chapter 463. These few days, Chenxi's life was quite fulfilling. In addition to taking care of the little girl's daily life, he also had to be careful not to let his wife get lost. Speaking of which, Qin Ruoying was really like an old person with Alzheimer's. She didn't talk much. Every day, after sending the little girl to school with Chenxi, she would wander aimlessly on the streets. No matter how Chenxi tried to strike up a conversation with her, Qin Ruoying didn't care at all. They used to be very close, but now they were gradually drifting apart. Of course, These seemingly estranged situations were, in fact, only superficial. In fact, every time when the little girl was out of school, Chinshi only had to say that Nian was out of school, and Qin Ruoying would immediately stop and look back at him silently. At this time, Chinshi would immediately call for a taxi, and then the couple would take a taxi back to school to pick up the little girl. Day after day, the cycle repeated itself. Although Chinshi was still a little worried about Qin Ruoying's situation, he didn't panic because of this. Anyway, the soul mirror was in his hands, and Yuhuan Tianzuan was imprisoned in Saturn Ring by him. They had been separated for too long, and now that they were finally reunited, how could Chinshi leave so easily? In addition, the soul mirror seemed to have run out of energy recently. No matter how he tried, the soul mirror didn't respond. Therefore, Chinshi planned to wait for a while until his life gradually stabilized, then he would find time to return to Saturn Ring to have a good chat with Yuhuan Tianzuan. At that time, wouldn't Yingying's situation be solved? But then again, after returning home this time, Chinshi obviously felt that his life was a little different from before. The reason was the little girl. Nian was more than 6 years old. Generally, from this time onwards, the burden on the shoulders of the parents would become a lot lighter. After all, the child spent half of her time in school every day. The school shared a portion of the responsibility for the parents, so the parents naturally didn't have to work as hard as before. At this stage, the child's academic performance and performance in school would become the main concern of every parent. And what was Nian's greatest strength? Wasn't she smart and sensible? Whenever the school arranged an exam, the little guy's results would always be the first in his grade. As for her performance in school, there was no need to mention it. Some time ago, at the request of the school, the teacher gave each child in the class an application form for joining the Young Pioneers. After Nian submitted her application, the school quickly approved it. Because they were still in the first grade, there were only 10 places in each class. With Nian's usual performance, there was naturally no problem for her to enter the first batch. Yingying, you went to Dongzaimen yesterday. Hey, that's Pan Garden, you've been there too. Look, you've already walked around this ring. Why don't I'll take you to the summer palace today, okay? That place used to be a royal garden. There are mountains and rivers, and there's a lot of vegetation. It's much better than this reinforced concrete. Qin Ruoying didn't speak the whole time. No matter how Chinshi tried to talk to her, she acted as if she didn't hear him. However, when Chinshi gave her directions, Qin Ruoying reacted, so she didn't continue to walk down Chang'an Avenue. Qin Ruoying stopped walking, as if she was thinking about where she should go now. Seeing this, Chinshi suddenly thought of something and quickly added, "Oh yeah, I've taken Nian there before, she really likes it there, so I guess you'll like it too." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying turned around and looked at him. She seemed to be moved by Chinshi's suggestion, so for the first time ever, she said, "Let's go." Okay. Chinshi was overjoyed. He quickly waved his hand to hail a taxi, then he helped Qin Ruoying into the car. However, just as he was excitedly introducing Summer Palace to Qin Ruoying, an ear-piercing ringtone suddenly rang. "Hey, Yingying, hold on, I need to take this call." Chinshi picked up the phone, but there was no number displayed on it. He hesitated for a moment, then considering that he usually didn't receive any harassing calls, the caller should be someone he knew, so he finally pressed the answer button. "Hello? Who is this?" "Chinshi. It's me. Second aunt." As soon as the call connected, Wang Chuanju's slightly anxious voice sounded from the other end of the phone. When Chinshi heard the sobbing tone in her voice, she immediately frowned and asked, "Auntie? What's wrong? Did something happen?" Qin was injured by someone. Those people might even take her life. "Second aunt, I beg you, please save Qin. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com, Wonderful Book House. Com. Chapter 464. Something happened to Qin. The moment she heard this, even Chinshi couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. His sister-in-law had only left home for a few days. How could something have happened to her? Chen Shi was well aware of Qin Shuiqing's abilities. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even if his sister-in-law met Jiang Yan, she could still barely last 2 or 3 moves against him. Although his sister-in-law was no match for Jiang Yan, if Jiang Yan really wanted to take her down, he would still have to put in a lot of effort. After all, Qin Shuiqing was a cultivator at the Golden Core stage. If she couldn't beat him, wouldn't she know how to run? Could it be that her bad temper was acting up again? Why did he end up in such a hopeless situation because he had to compete with others? Wang Chuanjiu had always been strong. Now that she was calling Chen Shi, her voice sounded like she was about to cry. So even if Chen Shi used his butt to think, he could tell that the situation might be serious. Even if the entire Wu Lian family was mobilized, they probably wouldn't be able to solve this problem in a short period of time. His sister-in-law was family after all. Chen Shi naturally couldn't refuse. Thus, he quickly replied, "Second aunt, don't worry. Send me the location. I'll rush over and see what's going on." Okay. After hanging up, Wang Chuanjiu immediately sent the location of the town to Chen Shi's phone. At this moment, Chen Shi seemed to suddenly remember something. He quickly said to Qin Ruoying, "Something happened to Qin Qing. I have to go and see." Qin Ruoying glanced at him indifferently. She didn't seem to know who Qin Qing was at all. Sigh. Seeing her cold expression, Chen Shi could only shake his head and sigh. What should he do? Bring Ying with him? She probably wouldn't agree at all. But if he left Ying here alone, Chen Shi would feel a little uncomfortable. He wasn't really afraid that Ying would get lost, but he was afraid that she would feel lonely. In such a big city like Shangjing, she was unfamiliar with the people and the place. Where could she go by herself? Chen Shi was a little hesitant. Qin Ruoying seemed to have suddenly understood his difficulties. She suddenly said, "You go, I'll go by myself." Just 7 words. This was the longest sentence that Qin Ruoying had said to Chen Shi during this period of time. Hearing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but smile. After he quickly signaled the driver to stop by the side, he quietly left a restriction on Qin Ruoying. At the same time, he didn't forget to remind her, "Ying, don't run around. I'll come back to find you as soon as I'm done here. Nian gets out of school at 4 o'clock. We'll pick her up together. You know that kid's temper. If she doesn't see you after school, she'll definitely be angry with me again." Chen Shi leaned on the car door and kept muttering. When the driver was a little impatient, he reluctantly got up and waved goodbye to Qin Ruoying. "Oh, right, Ying, I put a lot of cash in my bag. If you see anything you like, buy anything, don't save money, it's okay if you run out of cash. You have a payment app on your phone. There's money in it." The taxi gradually went away. Chen Shi was still standing on the side of the road. He kept waving in the direction of the car. It was only a temporary separation, but he made it seem like a separation of life and death. This made the passers-by stunned. It wasn't until the car merged into the traffic and completely disappeared from his sight that Chen Shi slowly retracted her arm and turned to walk into a side alley. At this time, Qin Ruoying, who had already left in the car, seemed to have just noticed the wallet that Chen Shi deliberately put on the seat. She picked up the wallet and opened it. Good Lord, it was full of $100 bills. The wallet was stuffed to the brim. It was as if it was not filled with money at all, but with Chen Shi's concern for her. "Girl, I can see that your husband is really good to you. It's rare to see a man as considerate as him these days. You two have children already, right? Uncle is experienced. Husband and wife quarrel at the head of the bed, but make up at the end. So, I'll take the liberty of advising you. It's about time you give him a way out. This man, although loosening and tightening can firmly tie his heart, you have to do it in moderation, right?" The driver was an old man. He had been secretly observing the two of them ever since they got on the car. According to his understanding, this must be a young couple having a conflict, so he smiled and put in a good word for Chen Shi. Qin Ruoying sat in the back without saying anything. So the driver did not notice that a faint smile had already appeared on her lips. In the sky above the small town. After Cheng Hua detonated the phoenix perch charred tail box to knock down Qin Shueqing, he and Yi Ji discussed how to deal with this woman. Why don't we just kill her? Although he succeeded in seriously injuring Qin Shueqing, Cheng Hua actually did not feel good. After all, he took a solid hit from that palm, so Qin Shueqing's true essence kept wreaking havoc in his body. This true essence was extremely rich. Not only did it disrupt his breathing, but it also left some internal injuries in his body. It was a good thing that Qin Ruoying did not have a magic weapon. Otherwise, this palm would have directly hit his internal organs and caused him to be in pain. No, we haven't figured out the details of the Tianshu ruins yet. We can't kill her so rashly. Yi Ji reached out to stop Cheng Hua. After thinking for a while, he frowned and continued, the commotion just now was too big, and you're already injured. Since the inheritance of the Tianshu ruins is still there, then we should do things more safely. Now that the enemy is in the dark and we are in the light, it's a big taboo for a military strategist. So let's take this woman and retreat first, find a place to wait for you to recover first. Yi Ji's analysis was very reasonable. After hearing this, Cheng Hua thought for a while, then nodded and replied, okay, I'll listen to you, but where should we go now? Where should we go? His voice fell. Not only was Yi Ji stunned, but even Cheng Hua who said this was stunned. Because, the first, where should we go, was said by him. But the second, where should we go, was definitely not said by him. The two, where should we go, sounded almost at the same time. Cheng Hua and Yi Ji were stunned for a full 2 or 3 seconds, then they lowered their heads to look at the source of the sound. They saw a strange man suddenly appear in the ruins of the town. The man stood so casually beside Qin Shueqing, but Cheng Hua and Yi Ji did not know when he came. Who are you? Cheng Hua was shocked and subconsciously wanted to attack this man. But at this time, Yi Ji pulled him behind him, then directly took out his life source magic weapon, the Tian Luo umbrella. Once the Tian Luo umbrella was taken out, it was like a cloud suddenly shrouded the ruins. The sky instantly darkened. Yi Ji's expression was stern. Almost without any hesitation, he directly launched the fiercest attack on this man, and the first move was a killing move. Crown Cloud Shadow, Hidden Killing Intent. The Tian Luo umbrella expanded at the speed of the naked eye, then like a large net, from top to bottom, directly enveloped the man. Seeing this, the man chuckled coldly. Didn't the teacher teach you? Children are disobedient, you'll get beaten up. This is too much. Once I start writing my daily routine, I say I'm water, then I'll have to trouble you big bosses. Next time you see someone leave a comment saying I'm only a cultivator and not a stay-at-home dad, help me explain properly. This is F*King water. How am I going to write my daily routine? The above is all a joke. To be honest, I've greatly reduced the daily routine. Now I'm writing the main content. It's fine to say I'm water, but at least I'm writing with a purpose. In any case, it's more than 1,000,000 words. I can't just write a chapter over and over every day, right? But if I continue to cut it, then I really won't have a daily routine. After all, I can't have my cake and eat it too. This is all I can do. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com, Wonderful Book House. Since your parents didn't educate you properly, Uncle will educate you on behalf of your parents today. He was a golden core cultivator, but now he was like a child who had made a big mistake and was being punished by his parents. Chen Shi kicked Yi Ji far away. You? Yi Ji was stunned. He endured the pain from his butt and looked down at the Tian Luo umbrella. Then he pointed at Chen Shi and exclaimed as if he had seen a ghost, "How did you escape?" Once the Tian Luo umbrella was opened, nothing could escape. Right now, the heavenly Luo umbrella was perfectly fine above the ruins, but Chen Shi suddenly appeared behind him like a ghost. How could Yi Ji not be shocked? Qi refining, foundation establishment, golden core, yuanying, soul formation, dongshu. From golden core to dongshu, there were several big realms between. Therefore, in Chen Shi's eyes, Cheng Hua and Yi Ji were two naughty kids who hadn't even grown their hair yet. The two of them were not old, about 15 or 16 years old. Cultivators had the ability to slow down aging and retain their youth, but this was also based on a solid foundation of cultivation. Therefore, it was obvious that their background was not simple. In order to facilitate the interrogation later, Chen Shi did not kill them directly. Instead, he used a more gentle way of physical punishment. But the young man was very proud. How could he be willing to endure such humiliation? When Chen Shi kicked Yi Ji's butt for the third time, Yi Ji could not help but explode. Damn it! You deserve to die. With a loud shout, Yi Ji, who had always been elegant and cautious, was now like a mad bull, fiercely charging at Chen Shi. Yi Ji's courage was commendable, but unfortunately, anger could not solve any problems. Seeing Yi Ji's expression of wanting to eat him alive, Chen Shi could not help but laugh coldly. Yi Ji's speed, which he was so proud of, was as slow as a turtle in Chen Shi's eyes. Therefore, when Yi Ji aggressively rushed in front of Chen Shi did not care what move he used. He raised his hand and slapped him. Pa! With one slap, Yi Ji was slapped until the sky turned dark and he saw stars. Like a spinning top that was whipped, Yi Ji quickly spun a few rounds in the air before falling heavily. Kid, uncle will give you a word of advice today. A young man who has achieved success should not be arrogant. You still have a long way to go. As he spoke, Chen Shi looked back at Cheng Hua, who had already flown far away. Naughty children had to be educated one by one. His sister-in-law was seriously injured, so Chen Shi naturally would not let the two of them go so easily. Now that Yi Ji had fallen to the ground and could not get up, where could Cheng Hua run to? Thinking of this, Chen Shi could not help but smile. He straightened his fingers and pointed his sword at Cheng Hua. However, just as he was about to shoot out the sword light, Cheng Hua suddenly let out a fierce howl. Immediately after, a strange-looking ship with a dragon head at the bow and a phoenix tail at the stern appeared out of thin air above the town. This time, it was Chen Shi's turn to be stunned. He did not put these two naughty children in his eyes at all, so after coming here, he was too lazy to use his divine sense to carefully scan the surroundings. Who would have thought? How could there be such a strange ship hidden right under his nose? Xingcha. Xingcha was an essential item for cultivators to travel the starry sky. Due to its size and use, Xingcha had already surpassed the category of ordinary magic treasures. This item was extremely rare. On one hand, it required too many materials. On the other hand, it required at least the cultivation of the Dongshu stage to refine Xingcha. Just the latter point alone meant that Xingcha was destined to be precious. Chen Shi knew what was good for him. Thus, the moment he saw the cloud-piercing shuttle appear, he seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He could not help but look at Yi Ji with an astonished expression, and hurriedly asked, "You two are not from Earth?" Chen Shi was somewhat bewildered, but Cheng Hua was not idle. After climbing onto the cloud-piercing shuttle, Cheng Hua directly slapped a spirit stone on the control panel. Then, he turned the ship around and rushed towards Yi Ji. Yi Ji, let's go. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book House. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.